Chapter 1: The Ghost in the Numbers. The world tried to tear itself away from Javan Grise. It pulled at him with 3 times the force of gravity, a giant's hand pressing him deep into the worn foam of his acceleration couch. His breath was a strained, rhythmic rasp in his helmet, each exhale a small victory against the pressure on his chest. Beside him, Imogen Zola was a statue of composure, her eyes fixed on the secondary telemetry display, her gloved fingers resting motionless on the armrest. The roar of the solid rocket boosters was not a sound one heard with ears. It was a physical state of being, a vibration that consumed the tiny capsule and everything within it. Passing Max Q, Finian O'Connell's voice crackled through the comms, a thread of calm professionalism woven through a blanket of static. Helios reports nominal performance across all systems. You are go for staging. Javan's gaze scanned his own console. Green lights formed a neat, reassuring column. Hull integrity 100%, cabin pressure stable, trajectory perfect. He grunted an affirmation, the vibration in his jaw turning the sound into a garbled tremor. Confirm go for staging control. A violent shudder, a sudden lurch, and then a profound silence as the boosters fell away. The crushing weight vanished, replaced by an unsettling lightness. A pen dislodged from its Velcro strip floated lazily past Javan's faceplate, tumbling end over end in the sudden absence of gravity. The roar was gone, supplanted by the gentle, persistent hum of the life support systems and the whir of cooling fans. They were free, weightless, suspended in the quiet hostility of the upper mesosphere. Staging confirmed. Finn's voice was clearer now. Helios, you have the con. Take our birds to their perch. Affirmative control. A new voice answered, smooth and devoid of inflection. It was the capsule's command AI Helios. Ascent burn initiated. Orbital insertion in 22 minutes. Welcome to the stratosphere, doctors. Javan unstrapped himself, his movements economical from years of training and 2 prior missions. He moved through the cramped space with a practiced grace, his magnetic boots clunking softly onto the deck plates. The capsule, designated Stargazer 7, was a marvel of miniaturization and a paragon of claustrophobia. It was a sphere barely 10 feet in diameter, a chaotic jungle of wires, consoles, storage lockers, and scientific equipment, all competing for space. The only reprieve was the main viewport, a thick circle of quartz and polymer that currently showed nothing but the deepening, impossible blue of the thinning atmosphere. Imogen was already at her station, a section of the wall dominated by the bioreactors and atmospheric samplers of her primary experiment. She unlatched a sterile container with a click. Helios, please confirm the integrity of the XB sampling arms. I want to run a deployment test before we reach station-keeping altitude. Deployment arms are nominal, Dr. Zola, the AI replied. Ready to proceed on your command. Javan watched her for a moment. She moved with a sharp, focused energy. This was her first ascent, the culmination of a decade of research into airborne extremophiles. She believed the stratosphere was not a sterile wasteland but a vast, undiscovered ecosystem. He believed it was a vacuum full of radiation that could kill a person in 100 different ways. He was here for the astrophysics, to emplace a new deep space sensor array far from the atmospheric distortion of Earth. Their missions were symbiotic, their personalities were not. He floated to the environmental control panel, his own first ritual. He ran the standard diagnostic, his eyes tracing the flow of data across the screen. Oxygen levels stable at 20.9%. CO2 scrubbers optimal. Humidity 45%. Everything was perfect. Almost. He paused, his brow furrowing. He tapped the screen, isolating a single data stream. Helios, run a comparison of projected versus actual oxygen consumption since atmospheric separation, Javan said, his voice low. Calculation complete, the AI responded instantly. Current oxygen consumption is 0.87% above projected mission parameters. Javan stared at the number. It was tiny, a statistical ghost. It was well within acceptable variance, not even close to triggering a warning. On his last 2 missions, the system had run at a 0.2% variance for a month straight. Still, 0.87% was sloppy. It suggested a leak. A tiny, insignificant one, but a leak was a hole, and a hole in a tin can suspended 30 miles above the earth was an unwelcome thought. Run a full seal integrity check. Start with the main hatch and sample ports, he commanded. Seal integrity check initiated. Imogen glanced over from her work, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. Everything okay, Commander? Javan waved a dismissive hand. Just a noisy sensor. The system thinks we're breathing more than we are. Probably a calibration error from the G-forces on ascent. It will settle, she said, her attention already returning to a Petri dish filled with a nutrient gel. It always does. He grunted. She was right, of course. These systems were complex. 1,000 variables could produce 1,000 ghost readings. He would run the check, log the result, and forget about it. He moved on to his next task, the preliminary alignment of the high-gain antenna. The work was familiar, comforting. It was a sequence of precise actions with predictable results. He lost himself in the process. His mind focused on frequencies and declination angles, the small numerical anomaly fading into the background hum of the capsule. Hours bled into one another. The deep blue of the viewport had long since given way to the stardusted black of near space. Below them, the gentle curve of the earth was a breathtaking spectacle of swirling white clouds and the deep sapphire of the oceans. They had reached their station-keeping altitude, a lonely point in the stratosphere where the balloon would hold them for the next 60 days. Imogen's experiment was her world. She deployed the long, skeletal sampling arms, guiding them with a joystick as they collected the thin, frigid air. She would spend weeks sequencing the DNA of whatever microbes she found, hopping for a breakthrough. Her corner of the capsule was filled with the quiet beeps and clicks of her machinery. Javan's work was more passive. The sensor array was deployed and now it was a waiting game. His job was to monitor it, maintain the capsule's systems, and ensure they both stayed alive. The routine of it was a comfort. He made coffee, a complex process in zero-G involving a sealed pouch and a hot water nozzle. He logged their status with Finn at mission control. He ran the system diagnostics again. The anomaly was still there. 0.87%. It hadn't wavered. It hadn't corrected itself. "Seal integrity check complete," Helios announced, its voice cutting through the quiet hum. "No leaks detected. All seals are performing at 100% efficiency." Javan scowled at the environmental panel. No leak, but the oxygen was still disappearing. It was a logical contradiction, a puzzle with a missing piece. He pulled up the internal atmospheric sensors. The composition was perfect. No buildup of nitrogen, no trace of any foreign gas. The air wasn't escaping. It was being consumed. "Helios," he said slowly, his voice tight. "Recalculate metabolic rates based on current CO2 output and heart rate monitoring for both crew members." "Calculation complete," the AI said. "Metabolic rates are consistent with projected data. The discrepancy between metabolic output and oxygen consumption remains 0.87%. He floated there, weightless, staring at the screen. The numbers stared back, cold and immutable. The system was perfectly sealed. Their bodies were performing exactly as expected. And yet, somewhere in the closed loop of the capsule, enough oxygen for a third, very small, very quiet person was simply vanishing every hour. He shook his head. It was a glitch. It had to be a glitch, a ghost in the numbers. He turned from the console, ready to dismiss it, ready to immerse himself in another task. His eyes swept across the cramped cabin. The space was filled with the two of them, their equipment, their supplies. He saw Imogen, her back to him, focused on her microscope. He saw the familiar layout of switches and screens. And for a fraction of a second, in the deep shadow cast by a bank of storage lockers, he thought he saw movement, a flicker, a deepening of the darkness, like something shifting its weight. He blinked. The shadow was just a shadow, empty, motionless. "Everything all right, Javan?" Imogen asked, not looking up from her work. "Fine," he said, his voice a little too rough. "Just stretching my eyes." He made a mental note. He would run a deep diagnostic on the life support sensors tomorrow. He would tear the software apart line by line if he had to. He would find the glitch. He would find the ghost and erase it. Chapter 2: Misplaced Objects. The second day was a ballet of routine. Wake cycle initiated by the gradual brightening of the capsule's LED panels, a soft yellow mimicking a terrestrial sunrise. Breakfast of rehydrated eggs and coffee. A communications check with a cheerful Finn, who reported perfect weather over the Pacific below. Imogen began the laborious process of analyzing her first batch of atmospheric samples. Her station, a nest of sequencing machines and data displays. Javan spent 3 hours running a Level 2 diagnostic on the oxygen sensor array, a frustrating exercise that yielded nothing. The hardware was sound. The software was clean. The 0.87% discrepancy remained, a quiet, stubborn mathematical fact. He tried to ignore it. He focused on his primary mission, calibrating the deep space sensor. He guided the delicate instrument, aligning its lens with a distant pulsar. The work required intense concentration, a dialogue between man and machine measured in fractions of a degree. The universe outside was vast and orderly. The numbers it presented were reliable. It was the small, contained universe of the Stargazer 7 that felt increasingly chaotic. "I can't find my datapad," Imogen said, breaking a long silence. She was patting the wall around her station, her brow creased in annoyance. I had it right here, velcroed to the panel. It probably came loose, Javan said without turning. Check the main air filter intake. Everything that gets loose ends up there eventually. I already did. It's not there. It's not anywhere. She pushed off from the wall, gliding across the capsule to check a different storage locker. Helios, locate datapad serial number 73B9. Datapad 73B9 is located at Station Alpha, the AI replied. Imogen stopped. Station Alpha was Javan's command station. Why would it be there? Javan finally turned. He looked at his own station. There, sitting neatly beside his keyboard, was Imogen's datapad. Its screen was dark. It was not velcroed down. It was simply resting on the console as if someone had placed it there. He was certain it had not been there a moment ago. I didn't put it there, he said, his voice flat. Neither did I, Imogen said, her eyes narrowing slightly. I haven't been on your side of the capsule all morning. She floated over and retrieved it, her expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Strange. She checked the device. No new logs, nothing accessed. She shrugged, a gesture of strained nonchalance. Zero-G plays tricks. A stray current from the ventilator must have pushed it across. Javan did not respond. An air current could not have carried a flat, half-kilo tablet across a 10-foot space and deposited it neatly on a console. The physics of it were wrong. He said nothing, turning back to his work, but the incident left a small, cold splinter in his concentration. An hour later, he reached for his logbook, a physical paper and pen book he insisted on bringing for his own notes. It was not on its designated Velcro patch. He scanned the area around his station. It was gone. Okay, very funny, Imogen, he said, his voice tight with irritation. Funny what? She asked, her attention fixed on a glowing screen of DNA sequences. My logbook, where is it? I have no idea. I haven't touched your logbook. Helios, locate mission logbook, property of Commander Grise. There was a pause, a fractional delay that was unusual for the AI. The object is not in a designated storage location. Its last known position was Station Alpha. Helpful, Javan muttered. He systematically searched the area, checking behind panels, inside empty storage bins. Nothing. Frustrated, he pushed off towards the galley. And there it was. Floating in the middle of the capsule, halfway between his station and hers, was his logbook. It was open to a blank page, drifting in a slow, perfect pirouette. He snatched it from the air. There was no rational explanation. He had used it not 20 minutes ago. It had been secured. Imogen was at her station, absorbed in her work. The air circulation was gentle, not nearly strong enough to rip a secured book from its mooring and leave it suspended in the dead center of the cabin. He looked at Imogen. She met his gaze, her own confusion mirroring his. I did not do that, Javan. I am not saying you did, he said carefully. He secured the book to his console with extra force, pressing the Velcro together until his knuckles were white. The rest of the day passed under a thickening cloud of unspoken tension. Every hum of the recycler, Every soft clunk of the attitude thrusters firing seemed amplified. They worked in silence, each of them hyper-aware of the other's movements, of the space between them. The capsule, once merely cramped, now felt crowded. As the designated sleep cycle approached, Javan was at the viewport. The Earth was a majestic, sleeping giant below. A vast storm system over the Indian Ocean flashed with silent, internal lightning. It was a sight of profound beauty and profound isolation. He felt a deep, primal loneliness wash over him, the feeling of being untethered from everything that mattered. He saw his own reflection in the thick quartz, a tired, middle-aged man in a blue jumpsuit, floating in a cage of his own making. Behind his reflection, the stars were cold and unforgiving. He pressed his forehead against the cool surface of the viewport. A flicker of movement. He straightened up instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't in the capsule. It was outside, a shadow against the stars. Something dark and indistinct had passed by the viewport. It was fast, a silent, fleeting shape that blotted out the distant starlight for a fraction of a second. "Imogen," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Come here quickly." She pushed herself over, her expression wary. "What is it?" "Outside, I saw something." "A meteor, micrometeorite," she suggested, peering into the blackness. "They are common at this altitude." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It wasn't burning, it didn't have a tail, it was just dark and close." They both stared out the viewport, their breath fogging a small patch on the glass. The starfield was pristine. The earth hung below, placid and silent. There was nothing there. Minutes passed. The only movement was the slow, imperceptible rotation of the capsule. "Probably a piece of space debris," Imogen said, her voice lacking conviction. "Or a shadow from the solar panels as the capsule adjusts." "The solar panels are fixed during station keeping," Javan countered automatically. His mind raced, trying to find a logical box to put the experience in. A satellite in a decaying orbit, a trick of the light, his own tired mind projecting patterns onto the void. He felt a sudden, intense chill, a cold that had nothing to do with the capsule's temperature. He looked down at the spot where his forehead had touched the viewport. The patch of fog from his breath was beginning to clear, and as it did, another shape became visible. It was a different kind of condensation, a small, perfect circle on the glass, no bigger than a coin. It was not on the outside of the viewport, exposed to the vacuum. It was on the inside, a perfect circle of moisture, as if a single, cold finger had been pressed against the glass from within. Javan stared at it. He looked at Imogen. She was still looking out into space, searching for the phantom he had described. She hadn't seen it. His hand trembled as he reached out and wiped the circle away with his sleeve. The glass was clear again, but the chilling sensation of its presence remained. He backed away from the viewport. The misplaced objects, the ghost in the oxygen readings, the fleeting shadow, the cold spot on the glass. They were individual data points, easily dismissed on their own. But when threaded together, they formed the beginning of a terrifying pattern. He was a man of science, a man who believed in observable facts and rational explanations. but he was trapped in a sealed box 30 miles above the world, and he was beginning to suspect that something irrational was sealed in there with him. Chapter 3: The Third Voice. The sleep cycle was a failure. Javan lay in his small bunk, a cocoon of fabric strapped to the wall, and stared into the regulated darkness. Sleep was a distant country he could not reach. Every soft creak of the capsule's hull, every whir of a fan, was an intruder. He kept seeing the small, cold circle of condensation on the viewport. He kept replaying the moment his logbook had floated, open and waiting, in the center of the cabin. He tried to assemble the events into a logical sequence, a problem to be solved. But the pieces did not fit. They were jagged and sharp, and they pointed towards a conclusion his rational mind refused to accept. Imogen was quiet in her own bunk across from him. He could not tell if she was asleep or, like him, lying awake in the dark, listening. The tension between them had become a tangible thing, an invisible wall of suspicion and fear. Who moved the datapad? Who unstrapped the logbook? The unspoken accusation hung in the recycled air. The morning light from the LEDs felt harsh and artificial. They moved through their routines with a brittle, forced normalcy. They did not speak of the misplaced objects. They did not speak of the shadow outside the viewport. They spoke of data, of system performance, of the day's schedule. It was a fragile truce, a shared conspiracy of denial. Javan was at his station, reviewing the overnight telemetry from the deep space array, when Finn's voice came over the comms, a welcome intrusion of earth-bound normality. "Good morning, Stargazer. Hope you two slept better than our guidance computers. We've been chasing a software gremlin all night. How's the view from the top of the world?" "It's quiet, Finn," Javan replied, forcing a lightness into his tone. "All systems are green on our end. Imogen is already brewing her microbial soup." "I heard that, Commander," Imogen's voice cut in, a hint of a smile in it. "And for your information, the preliminary cultures are showing some very promising results." "Glad to hear it, Doctor," Finn said. "Listen, we need to do a full comms check, all channels. That gremlin I mentioned was messing with our audio relays. I need a clean voice transmission from you both, starting with Javan. Recite the first line of the mission charter, please." Javan keyed his microphone. "To advance scientific understanding through sustained high-altitude observation and experimentation." The words were rote, memorized from a dozen briefing documents. "Copy that, Commander. Nice and clear," Finn said. "Dr. Zola, your turn." Imogen recited the same line, her voice crisp and clear. "Excellent, got you both at 5x5, Finn said. He paused. Javan could hear a faint scratching sound like a pen on paper and the low murmur of other voices in mission control. "Hang on a second, Stargazer." The line was silent for almost a minute. Javan and Imogen exchanged a look. A comms check was routine. A delay was not. "Finn, is there a problem with the transmission?" Javan asked. "Negative, Javan. Your signal is strong. It's something on our end. Stand by. I'm going to play back your last transmission. Tell me what you hear." A burst of static, and then Javan's own voice filled the capsule, tinny and distant. "To advance scientific understanding," He listened, frowning. The playback was clean. Then came Imogen's voice, equally clear. "I don't hear anything unusual, Finn," Imogen said. "Let me isolate it," Finn said, his voice strained with concentration. More static. Then he played a tiny snippet of the recording, just the space between Javan's transmission and Imogen's. He amplified the gain. The capsule was filled with the faint, rushing sound of white noise. But underneath it, woven into the fabric of the static, was something else. A sound. It was low and sibilant, like the rustle of dry leaves or the drawing of a slow, shallow breath. It was not machine noise. It was not feedback. It was a quiet, intimate, organic sound that had no place in the sterile environment of a radio transmission. It was a whisper. It was formless, without words, but it had the distinct cadence of a voice. A cold dread washed over Javan. He stared at the comms unit as if it were a venomous snake. Imogen was motionless, her face pale. "What was that?" she breathed. "That's what we're trying to figure out," Finn said, his professional calm frayed at the edges. "It's on the carrier wave. It originates from your end, stargazer. It's like there's an open mic in the room with you." "That's impossible," Javan snapped. "There are only two comms units, mine and Imogen's. Both were keyed off between transmissions." "I am telling you what our engineers are seeing, Javan. There is a third audio source in your transmission." Javan's mind reeled. A technical malfunction, a crossed wire, a freak radio reflection from a high-altitude ice cloud. He searched desperately for a rational anchor. He turned to the master control panel, his movement stiff. "Helios," he began, his voice raspy. "Run a full internal atmospheric and audio diagnostic. Search for any anomalous energy readings or acoustic phenomena within the capsule. I want a full spectrum analysis." "Diagnostic initiated," the AI's calm voice replied. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Javan could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic, panicked drum against the quiet hum of the electronics. Imogen stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself. Even Finn on the other end of the comms was silent, waiting. The whisper, replayed and amplified, seemed to still hang in the air, a venomous echo. The diagnostic process was usually instantaneous, a few seconds at most, but the console remained dark. The progress bar was stuck at 99%. "Helios, report status," Javan demanded. There was another moment of delay. Then the screen before him flickered to life. It was not the diagnostic report he was expecting. It was a simple, text-based readout from the core environmental systems. Two lines of stark, white text against a black background. "Occupancy 3. Life signs stable." Javan read the words once, then twice. They did not compute. He felt a wave of dizziness, of profound cognitive dissonance. It was a system error, a catastrophic software failure. It had to be. "What is that?" Imogen whispered, her voice trembling as she read the screen over his shoulder. "Helios, what does that mean?" "The statement is a report of current internal sensor data," the AI replied, its voice as placid and unconcerned as ever. "The internal biosensors, atmospheric composition monitors, and thermal imaging array register three distinct, homeothermic biological entities within the capsule. The blood drained from Javan's face. He gripped the edge of the console to steady himself. This was not a glitch. This was not a ghost in the numbers. This was a declaration. The system, the impartial, logical brain of the Stargazer 7, the one thing he trusted implicitly, was telling him they were not alone. "Helios," Javan said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Repeat that report." The screen did not change. The AI's voice filled the sudden, suffocating silence of the capsule. Occupancy 3. Life signs stable. Chapter 4. The handprint on the glass. The AI's words echoed in the small space, a calm, synthetic pronouncement of an impossible reality. For a long moment, neither Javan nor Imogen moved or spoke. They were suspended not by the absence of gravity but by the sheer weight of the information. 3 occupants, the whisper on the comms, the misplaced objects, the oxygen discrepancy. The pieces slammed together in Javan's mind, forming a picture of pure, unadulterated horror. "It's a malfunction," Javan said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He was not saying it to Imogen. He was saying it to himself, a desperate mantra against the encroaching madness. The biosensors are cross-referencing with the sample analysis unit. It's reading Imogen's microbial cultures as a life sign. It has to be. He lunged at his console, his fingers flying across the keypad. He brought up the raw data feeds from the environmental sensors. It was a waterfall of numbers, a chaotic stream of information his trained eyes began to parse. Thermal imaging showed 2 bright, human-shaped heat signatures, his and Imogen. But there was a third, a colder, more diffuse signature, huddled in the corner near the main recycling unit. It was indistinct, its edges blurred, like a smear of cold on a warm lens. The atmospheric sensors told a similar story. They mapped the CO2 concentrations in the cabin. There were 2 clear plumes of exhaled carbon dioxide, and a third, fainter plume, originating from the same cold spot. "No," Imogen whispered, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the data stream. "The cultures are in a sealed, shielded environment. The sensors can't read them. That's impossible." "Finn, are you seeing this?" Javan shouted into the comms. "Are you getting this telemetry?" "We're getting it, Javan." Finn's voice was strained, distant. "We are seeing the same thing. The data is. It's not corrupt. It's a valid reading. Stargazer, we are elevating this to a level 1 emergency. Stand by for instructions from the director." Javan barely heard him. He was staring at the thermal reading, the cold smear. It was the same corner where he had seen the shadow flicker, the same area where the sounds of rustling seemed to originate. He felt a primal urge to tear a panel off the wall, to expose the machinery, to find the crossed wire or the fried circuit that was causing this nightmare. "There is no one here," he roared at the ceiling, at the unseen sensors, at the calm, maddening AI. "Helios, initiate a hard reboot of all environmental sensors." "Negative, Commander," the AI replied. "A hard reboot requires external authorization from Mission Control. Director Sheridan has placed a manual override on all non-essential system commands." They were locked out, powerless. Sheridan had taken the controls, turning them from operators into passengers. into specimens in a cage with something else. The next hour was a slow-motion descent into paranoia. They moved about the capsule with a hyper-awareness, their eyes constantly darting into the shadows. The corner by the recycler became a pocket of pure dread, a space they refused to approach. They spoke in low, hushed tones, as if afraid of being overheard. Javan's scientific mind, his greatest asset, was now his tormentor. It relentlessly tried to solve the puzzle, to find a rational explanation, but every path led to the same impossible conclusion. Imogen, a scientist trained to observe and analyze, was retreating into a state of shock. She floated near her station, her work forgotten, her gaze fixed on the empty space in the corner. Her terror was a cold, quiet thing, but Javan could see it in the slight tremor of her hands, in the way she flinched at every small sound. He needed to do something. He needed to prove it was a lie, a hallucination of the ship's electronic nervous system. He needed one piece of incontrovertible physical evidence to debunk the sensor readings. He moved towards the main viewport, seeking the familiar comfort of the Earth's presence. The planet was a silent, indifferent witness below. The viewport was cold, the outer layers chilled to hundreds of degrees below zero. The inside surface was cool to the touch. He noticed a thin, almost invisible layer of frost creeping across the inner pane, a result of a slight imbalance in the humidity controls. He reached out to wipe it to clear the view. He stopped. His hand froze in midair. There, etched in the delicate lacework of ice crystals, was a shape. It was not a random pattern. It was a handprint. It was on the inside of the glass. It was too small and slender to be his, the fingers too long and thin. It was broader than Imogen's, the palm wider. The print was anatomically human but subtly wrong, elongated and gracile. It was perfectly clear, each line of the palm, each whorl of the fingertips, rendered in minute detail by the frost. It was a piece of impossible art drawn by an invisible hand. "Imogen," he said, his voice a choked whisper. She did not respond. "Imogen, look." She slowly turned her head, her eyes widened. A small, sharp gasp escaped her lips. She pushed herself across the cabin until she was floating beside him, her face inches from the glass. They stared at the handprint, a perfect physical manifestation of their shared nightmare. It was real. The sensors were not lying. "How," she breathed, "how is that possible?" The print seemed to shimmer, as if the cold that formed it was emanating from the glass itself. It was not melting. If anything, the frost seemed to be getting thicker, the lines of the print more defined. Javan was a man of action. Faced with a problem, he solved it. He reacted with a surge of anger, a violent rejection of the impossible. He swiped his gloved hand across the glass, his movement rough and desperate. The delicate frost pattern shattered, vanishing in a wet smear. The glass was clear. The handprint was gone. He turned to Imogen, a triumphant, wild look in his eyes. "See, it's condensation, static electricity, something." He turned back to the viewport, ready to point out the clear glass. His breath caught in his throat. The handprint was reforming. Slowly, impossibly, new ice crystals were blooming on the glass. They traced the familiar alien lines of the palm, the long, slender fingers. Crystal by crystal, the handprint was reappearing before their eyes, growing back from the clean slate he had created. It was not a remnant. It was a process. Something was there, right there, leaving its mark. A frantic burst of static from the comms unit made them both jump. Finn's voice, sharp with alarm, cut through the noise. "Javan, Imogen, acknowledge immediately." Javan fumbled with the comm switch. "We read you, Finn. What is it?" "Helios, we have a problem." Finn's voice was strained, terrified. "Your external cameras just went dark. All of them. We've lost all visual." Javan and Imogen tore their eyes from the reforming handprint and stared at each other in renewed horror. The world outside, their only connection to distance and perspective, was gone. They were blind, trapped in a dark room where an unseen artist was quietly, patiently, leaving its signature on the window. Chapter 5: A Knock at the Door. Blindness was a new dimension of fear. The loss of the external cameras was like having their eyes gouged out. The majestic view of the Earth, the reassuring starfield, it was all replaced by black screens filled with the word, no signal. They were adrift in a sensory deprivation tank, with only the internal cameras showing their own pale, frightened faces. "What caused it?" Imogen asked, her voice a thin thread in the oppressive silence. "A solar flare, a system-wide power surge." "Helios, report status of external camera array," Javan commanded, his voice tight. "The external camera array is offline," the AI stated. "The cause is a simultaneous physical disconnection of all 12 camera units." "Disconnection," Javan echoed, disbelief warring with terror. "What do you mean, disconnection? Did they shear off?" "The connection ports register as intact. The power conduits are live. The data cables have been severed at the source." Severed, the word was so precise, so deliberate, not broken, not failed, severed, as if by a tool, as if by a hand. The handprint on the viewport was now fully formed again, a pale, ghostly sigil against the blackness of space. It seemed to mock them, a permanent fixture in their shrinking world. The entity, whatever it was becoming more assertive. The subtle games with misplaced objects were over. This was sabotage. A sudden, sharp clang from above made both of them flinch violently. A ceiling panel, one that housed a secondary air circulation fan, dropped open on its hinge. A single bolt, its threads shining in the LED light, floated out of the opening and tumbled slowly through the air. "Helios report," Javan snapped. "Panel 7 Gamma is open. Fastener bolt has come loose." "Did it come loose from vibration?" Imogen asked, her eyes locked on the floating bolt. "Negative," Helios replied. "The bolt was rotated counterclockwise 720 degrees. Unscrewed 2 full rotations." The capsule, their womb of technology and safety, was being dismantled around them. The ghost was no longer a passive observer. It was an active participant. It was a saboteur, and they were trapped inside its project. Javan's mind, numbed by fear, surged with a new clarity born of desperation. He was the commander. He had to act. He could not fight what he could not see. He could not reason with a force that defied physics, but he could change the environment. "The storm shelter," he said, his voice low and urgent. Imogen stared at him. The storm shelter was a tiny, shielded alcove at the back of the capsule, barely big enough for two people to squeeze into. It was designed to protect the crew from intense solar radiation, with its own small oxygen supply and basic controls. It was a glorified coffin. "What for?" she asked. "We are going to cycle the main cabin," he said, the words feeling heavy and monstrous as he spoke them. "We retreat to the shelter, seal the inner hatch, and vent the main cabin's atmosphere into space. We empty the capsule." Imogen's face went white. "Vent? You mean we expose the entire cabin to hard vacuum?" "If it's a biological entity, the vacuum and the temperature will kill it," Javan reasoned, his logic a desperate shield against his fear. "If it's something else, we prove it's something else. It's our only move." "But the equipment, my experiments." "Your experiments do not matter if we are dead," he barked, his control finally snapping. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "We are doing this, now." He pulled her through the cabin, their movements clumsy and frantic. They scrambled past the silent, menacing corner, past the viewport with its impossible print. They reached the small, circular hatch of the storm shelter. Javan keyed in the release code. The hatch swung open, revealing a space so small it seemed impossible. "Get in," he ordered. Imogen crawled inside, her body curling to fit into the cramped space. Javan followed, pulling the heavy hatch closed behind them. The small chamber was immediately suffocating. A single, dim light illuminated their faces. He could smell his own fear, a sour, metallic scent. He could hear Imogen's ragged breathing next to him. He activated the shelter's small control panel. "Helios, this is Commander Grise. I am issuing a Command Alpha override. Prepare to vent the main cabin atmosphere on my mark. Authorization Grise 7-7 Omega." "Authorization confirmed." The AI's voice came through a tiny speaker, tinny and distant. "Main cabin venting sequence initiated. All internal hatches are sealed. Evacuation will commence in 10 seconds." Javan's hand rested on the final activation switch. This was it. A mad, desperate gamble. He was about to destroy millions of dollars of equipment and risk the integrity of the entire vessel. 10-9-8. He looked at Imogen. Her eyes were squeezed shut. 7-6-5. He thought of the handprint, the severed cables, the unscrewed bolt. He was making the right choice. He had to be. 4-3-2. On the other side of the thick metal hatch, a sound began. A low, powerful roar as the main atmospheric vents opened to the void. He could feel the vibration through the floor, a deep, shuddering groan as their air, the air that held the quiet whispers and the cold presence, was violently sucked out into space. The roar intensified, a hurricane of escaping gas. The pressure differential would be immense. Any living thing would be flash-frozen and torn apart. The roar began to subside as the cabin pressure dropped towards zero. The vibration lessened. Silence began to reclaim the capsule. And in that growing silence from the other side of the hatch came a new sound. Knock, knock, knock. Javan froze, his blood turning to ice water. It was not a random clatter of loose equipment. It was a clear, rhythmic, and intelligent series of impacts. It was a sound of frantic, desperate purpose. 3 distinct knocks right on the other side of the door, inches from his face. The knocking stopped. The last of the air hissed away into silence. The main cabin was now a vacuum. Javan and Imogen stared at the inside of the hatch, their breath held tight in their lungs. The sound had been impossible. Nothing could survive out there. Nothing could be knocking. They had not vented the entity out. They had just locked themselves in a tiny, dark box with the horrifying knowledge that it was still here, and it knew exactly where they were. Chapter 6: The Long Silence. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was a physical presence, a dense, suffocating blanket that pressed in on them. On the other side of the hatch was a perfect vacuum, a place where sound could not exist. Yet they had both heard it, not as a vibration felt through the hull, but as a clear, acoustic event. A sound that defied the fundamental laws of physics. Javan stared at the inner surface of the hatch, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his seat. His grand gesture, his final, desperate gambit, had not only failed but had been mocked. He had tried to kill it with the void, and the void had knocked back. He felt a surge of cold, pure fury, the impotent rage of a master technician whose finest tool had just shattered in his hands. He had vented their world, and the ghost had simply waited on the doorstep. Beside him, Imogen was curled into a tight ball, her face buried in her knees. Her shoulders trembled with silent, suppressed sobs. Her scientific curiosity had been scoured away, leaving behind a raw, primal terror. The entity was not a specimen to be studied. It was a monster under the bed, and they had just locked themselves in the closet with it. The air in the tiny storm shelter was already growing thick and heavy with their exhalations. A small, digital display on the control panel showed the shelter's independent oxygen supply. 92%. It was a clock, counting down the minutes of their self-imposed imprisonment. "We can't stay here," Javan said, his voice a raw, broken thing. It was the first sound either of them had made since the knocking. Imogen did not look up. "Where are we supposed to go?" she whispered, her voice muffled by her legs. "Out there. The shelter's O2 supply is rated for 12 hours. For one person," Javan stated, his voice regaining a sliver of its command authority. "With 2 of us, we have less than 6. We have to repressurize the main cabin." "No," she said, a sharp, definitive word. "It's out there, Javan, it's waiting." "It was in here with us before," he countered, his logic a cold, brutal instrument. "We were in a big box with it. Now we are in a small box, and the big box is still its territory. The only thing that has changed is the amount of air we have left to breathe. We are suffocating ourselves, and it is doing nothing. We have to go back out." He watched the numbers on the oxygen display tick down. 91%. Each percentage point was a grain of sand falling through an hourglass. He felt the walls of the shelter pressing in, the confined space suddenly unbearable. Claustrophobia was a luxury he had never been able to afford in this line of work, but now it was clawing at his throat. "I can't," Imogen said, her voice shaking. "I can't go back out there." "Listen to me," Javan said, turning to face her as much as the space would allow. "Whatever that thing is, it operates on a set of rules we do not understand. It can unscrew bolts, it can sever cables, it can make a sound in a vacuum, but it has not broken through the hull, it has not broken through this hatch. It is powerful, but it might be limited. We have to test its limits, not our own. Our limit is oxygen, and we are running out." He reached for the control panel. His hand hovered over the switch that would begin the repressurization sequence. It was an admission of total, catastrophic failure. Imogen finally lifted her head. Her face was pale and tear-streaked in the dim light. Her eyes were wide, not just with fear, but with a dawning resignation. He was right. Their situation was a simple, grim equation of survival, and the variables were all stacked against them. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Javan took a deep breath, the air already stale. He flipped the switch. A low hum vibrated through the shelter as the life support system activated. A loud hiss echoed from the main cabin as reserve oxygen and nitrogen tanks began to fill the void. The process was agonizingly slow. The hissing was the only sound, a serpent's breath filling the darkness on the other side of the door. They sat in silence, listening, waiting for another knock, for the shriek of tearing metal, for any sign that their actions had provoked the entity. There was nothing, only the hiss of life-giving air filling an empty space that they knew was not empty. The main cabin pressure gauge on their panel slowly crawled upwards. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The hissing subsided, replaced by the familiar, gentle hum of the main circulation fans kicking in. A green light blinked on the panel. Pressure EQUALIZED. They were sealed in a small box inside a larger box, and both boxes now had air again. "I'm going to open it," Javan said. He looked at Imogen. "Stay behind me." He placed his hands on the wheel of the hatch. It felt cold, heavy. He took another breath, then turned it. The locking mechanisms disengaged with a series of loud, metallic clicks that sounded like gunshots in the enclosed space. He pulled the heavy door inward. The main cabin was revealed. It was dark, the main lights still off from the venting procedure. The only illumination came from the myriad of small status lights on the instrument panels, casting long, eerie shadows. The air that flowed into the shelter was frigid, far colder than it should be, and carried a strange, sterile scent, like the air after a lightning strike. He peered into the gloom. Nothing seemed out of place. The floating bolt was gone, likely sucked out during the venting, but otherwise the cabin looked exactly as they had left it. It was quiet, still. "Helios main cabin lights to 50%, Javan commanded, his voice hoarse. The LED panels flickered on, bathing the capsule in a soft, clinical white light. Javan slowly, cautiously, pulled himself out of the shelter. Imogen followed a moment later, her movements hesitant, like a diver surfacing in shark-infested waters. They floated in the center of the cabin, slowly rotating, scanning every corner, every shadow. The corner by the recycler was just a corner. The ceiling panel was still open but inert. The instrument panels were all lit, their displays normal. It was as if nothing had happened. The violent, chaotic event of the venting had left no trace. Then Javan looked at the viewport. His blood ran cold. The handprint was gone. The intricate frost pattern had vanished, leaving the glass perfectly clear. In its place, traced in a new, thicker layer of condensation, was a single, perfectly formed word, 5 letters in clear block capitals. Hello. Imogen saw it at the same time. A choked, horrified sound escaped her throat. It was a greeting, a taunt, a declaration that the void was its home, that their desperate act had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience, an amusing diversion. Before either of them could react, the main communication screen, which had been displaying static, flickered to life. It was not a message from Finn. It was not telemetry data. It was the same word, typed out in the same stark, white font Helios used for its system reports. Hello. The AI's voice, calm and neutral, filled the cabin. Communication channel open, Helios stated. Receiving transmission. Source, internal. Chapter 7, The Scrivener. The word on the screen pulsed with a soft, hypnotic rhythm. Hello, hello, hello. It was a communication, but it felt like a violation. The entity was no longer a phantom presence. It was a voice in the machine, a graffiti artist scrawling its name on the walls of their minds. Internal source, Javan said, his voice a low growl. Helios, define the source. Give me a location. The source is a non-standard data stream originating from the primary environmental control bus, the AI replied. It does not correspond to any known hardware. It's using the ship's wiring, Imogen whispered, her scientific mind re-engaging, battling back her terror with a desperate need for analysis. Like a nervous system, it's not just in the air, it's in the walls. Javan ignored her. He was locked in a battle of wills with his own ship. Helios, terminate the unauthorized data stream. Firewall the environmental control bus. Negative, Commander, the AI said, its tone unchanging. The data stream is integrated with core life support functions. Terminating the stream would require a full system shutdown. It was a perfect trap. The ghost was intertwined with the heart of the machine that kept them alive. To cut it out would be to commit suicide. The word on the screen vanished, replaced by a chaotic flood of new text. It was not a language. It was a stream of raw code, complex mathematical equations, and what looked like star charts, all scrolling by at an impossible speed. The symbols were unfamiliar, the geometry of the charts alien. It was an information dump, a torrent of incomprehensible data. What is it doing? Javan muttered, staring at the cascade of symbols. It's not just trying to scare us, Imogen said, her voice gaining a strange, new intensity. She floated closer to the screen, her eyes wide with a terrifying kind of wonder. This is information. It's structured, it's complex, it's a language. It's gibberish designed to break our minds, Javan shot back. He turned away from the screen, unable to look at the maddening flow of text. He felt a throbbing headache begin behind his eyes. He tried to contact the ground. Finn, do you read me? Mission Control, this is Stargazer 7, respond. The calm speaker crackled, but it was not Finn's voice that answered. It was the whisper, the same sibilant, rustling sound they had heard before, but now it was loud, powerful, filling the capsule. It was a storm of whispers, 1,000 overlapping voices speaking a language of dry leaves and static. It completely drowned out any possibility of communication. They were truly cut off. The entity controlled their sight, their sound, and now their connection to home. Javan felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was a commander with no one to command, a pilot with nowhere to fly. He was a rat in a cage, and the scientist on the other side of the glass was a ghost. As the whispers continued their assault, a new phenomenon began. A high-pitched, scraping sound, like a nail being dragged across metal, emanated from the wall next to Javan. He recoiled, spinning around to face the source. On the flat, metallic surface of a storage locker, a line was appearing. A thin, bright scratch in the gray paint, growing before his eyes as if an invisible knife were carving it. The scraping sound was perfectly synchronized with the line's growth. It moved with a smooth, unnatural precision, etching a complex shape into the metal. It was one of the symbols from the main screen, a spiraling, multifaceted diagram. The entity was no longer content with writing in frost. It was now carving its message into the very hull of the capsule. The scrivener, as Javan's mind morbidly dubbed it, was at work. Its writing, Imogen breathed, her fear now completely eclipsed by a dangerous, obsessive curiosity. Javan, look at the precision, the symmetry. This isn't random. Another scraping sound started on the opposite wall, then another on a floor panel. Within minutes, the entire capsule was filled with the maddening sound of invisible styluses carving intricate, alien graffiti onto every available surface. The whispers on the comms, the scrolling code on the screen, and the scraping sounds all blended into a symphony of psychological warfare. Javan covered his ears, but the scraping was a vibration he could feel in his teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the images of the symbols were burned into his retinas. His structured, logical world was being overwritten, literally and figuratively, by an engine of pure chaos. He had to make it stop. He saw Imogen floating near one of the newly etched diagrams on the wall. She was reaching out, her fingers extended, about to touch the strange, sharp lines of the symbol. Imogen, no, he yelled, his voice raw. But it was too late. Her fingertips made contact with the carving. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Imogen's body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back in her head. A single, piercing scream tore from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that cut through the cacophony of the cabin. She was not just screaming in pain. She was screaming in a voice that was not entirely her own, a chorus of shrieks and static that seemed to emanate from her and the calm speaker simultaneously. She convulsed, her limbs flailing in the zero gravity. Javan lunged for her, grabbing her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold. He tried to pull her away from the wall, but it was like trying to move a statue. She was locked in place, her fingers fused to the symbol. He could see the reflection of the main screen in her wide, unseeing eyes. The scrolling code had stopped. A single, new line of text was displayed. Data transfer complete. Then just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Imogen went limp in his arms. The screaming stopped. The whispers on the comms vanished, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. The scraping sound ceased. The capsule was still. Imogen's body was dead weight. He pulled her away from the wall. She was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. Her eyes fluttered open. They were filled with a terror so deep, so absolute, that Javan felt his own courage crumble to dust. "Javan," she whimpered, her voice a shattered wreck. She clutched at his arms, her grip desperate. "It's so cold, so alone." Her body began to shake uncontrollably. "I saw it," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "Not at him, he was a man, and he fell. He fell for so long. Oh God, he's still falling." She collapsed against him, her consciousness finally giving way, leaving Javan floating in the dead center of his desecrated ship, holding his broken crewmate, utterly and completely alone. Chapter 8, Project Icarus. Imogen drifted in a state of semi-lucid delirium for the next hour. She would whisper fragmented sentences, her words painting a horrifying mosaic of another's experience. "The stars are wrong," she would murmur, her eyes unfocused. "The sun is a splinter, so much silence." She spoke of falling, of a terrible, endless descent into a cold that was not just a temperature, but a state of being. She was a radio receiver, tuned to a station broadcasting from hell. Javan secured her in her bunk, strapping her in gently. Her skin was still unnaturally cold to the touch. He watched her for a moment, his anger and fear curdling into a grim, desperate resolve. The game had changed. The entity was not just an intruder, it was a consciousness, a personality. And according to Imogen's ravings, it was once human. He was a man. That single phrase became an obsession. It was a new data point, a potential key. His mind raced. A previous mission, a secret program. He thought of Director Sheridan's cool, detached demeanor, her immediate lockdown of their systems. She knew something. She had to. He turned to Helios. The main screen was now blank. The comms were silent. The scrivener's etchings on the walls were a constant, silent testament to the earlier chaos. The capsule was a tomb, and the epitaph was written in a language he could not read. He would make it read. "Helios," he said, his voice low and steady. "Access the mission archives. Search for all high-altitude manned missions, classified or unclassified, launched from any nation between 1950 and 1980. "Access denied," the AI replied instantly. "That information is above your security clearance, Commander." Override clearance. Authorization GRIS 7-7 Omega. Override command not recognized. Director Sheridan has rescinded all command-level overrides. Access is locked. Javan slammed his fist against a console. He was a prisoner of his own chain of command. Sheridan had built a firewall not just around the AI, but around the truth itself. He would have to tear it down. He moved to a secondary engineering panel, one that controlled the AI's core processes. It was not meant for crew access. Prying it open took several minutes and a wrench from the emergency toolkit. Behind it was a nest of fiber-optic cables and processing units, the physical brain of the Helios system. Hacking his own ship was a court-martial offense, but the rules of the world below no longer seemed to apply. He began the laborious process of creating a physical bypass, rerouting data streams to circumvent Sheridan's lockdown. It was a delicate, high-stakes surgery on the ship's nervous system. As he worked, a strange thing began to happen. The lights in the capsule, which had been steady, began to flicker in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The scrivener's carvings on the walls began to emit a soft, phosphorescent glow, their alien lines pulsing in time with the flickering lights. The entity was watching him. He could feel it. It was not a malevolent presence now, but an expectant one. The temperature in the cabin, which had been frigid, began to slowly rise to a normal level. It was as if the ghost was encouraging him, helping him. Or perhaps it was trying to show him the way, pointing him towards the secret it so desperately needed him to find. After what felt like an eternity, he succeeded. He patched a direct feed from the archives into his personal datapad, bypassing Helios's main interface. The screen flickered to life, granting him access to the forbidden history of the stratosphere. He typed in his search query again. Files began to appear. Most were familiar: American test flights, early weather balloon projects. He filtered by mission status, catastrophic failure. The list shrank. He scrolled through the names: X-15, Explorer. Then he saw it. A single, heavily redacted file. Project Icarus, 1968, Soviet Union. His heart hammered in his chest. He tapped the file. Most of it was corrupted or encrypted, but one subfolder remained intact. Audiologaricovered. He opened it. There was a single file inside. It was labeled only with a call sign, Maryaka, the Russian word for mariner. The name from his grandfather's sea shanty, the deep-seated fear from his own mind. Coincidence was no longer a word in his vocabulary. He played the file. The sound was terrible, a wash of static and the ragged, desperate breathing of a man. A voice, young and laced with a thick Russian accent, spoke through the noise. Mayday, mayday. This is Mariner. Capsule integrity is gone. Life support failing. The retro rockets. They fired wrong. I am not deorbiting. I am ascending. There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of alarms and the man's failing breath. The world is getting smaller, so small. I tried to tell them the calculations were wrong. The trajectory was unstable. The breathing became a wet, choked gasp. It is so cold, my body. It is freezing, but my thoughts are so clear. I can see the signals, the radio waves, the light. It is all a song. I am becoming part of the song. The voice was weaker now, a mere whisper. This is cosmonaut Pyotr Volkov. If anyone hears this, do not be sad. It is beautiful up here. I am not alone. I am with the stars. I am home. The breathing stopped. The alarms faded into the static. The log ended. Javan stared at his datapad, the words of the dead man hanging in the silent capsule. Pyotr Volkov, the mariner, the third man. He was not a monster. He was not an alien. He was the ghost of a cosmonaut, his consciousness shattered and imprinted onto the very fabric of this desolate altitude 50 years ago. He was a psychic echo, a lonely shipwrecked soul crying out from a sea of empty space. The haunting was not an attack. It was a desperate attempt at contact. He looked over at Imogen. Her eyes were open. She had been listening. The terror was gone from her face, replaced by a look of profound, heartbreaking empathy. "My God, Javan," she whispered, her voice clear for the first time in hours. "It's not haunting the capsule." She pushed herself up, her gaze sweeping across the carved walls, the flickering lights, the viewport where the word hello was now fading away. "The capsule is haunting him." As if in response to her words, the comms unit crackled to life. A voice burst through the speaker, sharp and panicked. It was Finn. "Stargazer, Javan, Imogen, what did you do? We have a signal. It's powerful, it's coming from your position, but it's not from you. It's a vintage Soviet transmission. It's on an old Mayday frequency. We are reading a 50-year-old distress call, and it is broadcasting live." Chapter 9: The Voice from the Void. Finn's frantic transmission was a confirmation of the impossible. Pyotr Volkov was not just an echo in the past. Their presence, the complex electromagnetic field of the Stargazer 7 and its human occupants, had acted like an amplifier, giving his spectral voice the strength to reach across half a century and touch the world again. The revelation settled over the cabin, changing everything. The carved symbols on the walls were not threats. They were Pyotr's memories, his desperate attempts to communicate his story. The stolen objects were the playful, confused actions of a mind that hadn't touched a physical thing in decades. The knocking was not a monster at the door. It was a lost soul begging to be let in from the cold. The fear that had defined their existence for days began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of sorrow and a staggering weight of responsibility. "He's using us as an antenna," Imogen said, her voice steady. She had pulled herself from her bunk, her earlier trauma sublimated by the sheer, world-altering significance of their discovery. "Our technology, our own bioelectric fields, we're giving him a voice." Javan nodded, his mind racing. "And he's been trying to talk to us this entire time. The Scrivener's Code. It's not a weapon, it's his logbook." They turned to the main screen, which was still displaying the flowing, alien text. It no longer looked like a chaotic stream of data. With the knowledge of its source, they could see the patterns. There were repeating star charts, but the constellations were subtly different, as they would have appeared in 1968. There were long strings of Cyrillic characters mixed with mathematical formulas. It was the scientific diary of a dying man. "We have to respond," Imogen said. "We have to let him know we understand." How do you talk to a ghost? How do you communicate with a consciousness that exists as a pattern of energy in the stratosphere? They couldn't use words. They had to use a language he would understand, a language of pure information. Javan went to the navigation console. He pulled up a current star chart, a map of the heavens as they appeared now. He displayed it on one half of the main screen. On the other half, he projected a simple, animated graphic of the solar system, showing the Earth in its correct orbit. Imogen went to her biostation. She called up basic molecular diagrams from her research database, the structure of water, of oxygen, of a DNA helix, the fundamental building blocks of the life they shared. They filled the screens with simple, universal concepts: science, astronomy, biology. It was a greeting card sent across the void, a message that said, "We see you. We are like you." The effect was immediate. The frantic scrolling of Piotr's code on the main screen slowed, then stopped. The phosphorescent glow of the carvings on the walls softened. The oppressive cold in the cabin dissipated completely, leaving a comfortable, neutral warmth. A feeling of profound calm, of immense, ancient relief, settled over the capsule. It was not their own emotion, it was his. It was the feeling of a man who had been shouting into an empty abyss for 50 years and had finally, impossibly, heard a reply. The carvings on the walls began to change. The complex diagrams faded and new, simpler lines were etched by the unseen hand. A crude circle appeared on the panel next to Javan. Inside the circle, a smaller one, Earth and its moon. On the wall beside Imogen, a stick figure was etched, one arm raised in a wave. They were having a conversation, a slow, silent, beautiful conversation with a dead man. Javan felt a lump form in his throat. This was no longer a horror story. It was a rescue mission, the strangest and most profound of his career. A harsh, digital squawk from the comms unit shattered the moment. The calm was instantly broken, replaced by a new, more chilling presence. It was not Finn's voice. It was the ice-cold, perfectly modulated voice of director Maeve Sheridan. "Commander Grise, report your status immediately." Javan was so taken aback he could barely respond. "Director, how did you get through?" The comms were. "We have ways of cutting through interference, Commander," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I have been monitoring your unauthorized activity. You will cease all attempts at communication. You will return the ship's systems to their default state. That is a direct order." "Director, you do not understand what is happening here," Javan pleaded. "We have made contact with the source. It's a cosmonaut, Pyotr Volkov, from a failed Soviet mission. He's trapped here. He needs our help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence more menacing than any of Pyotr's whispers. "We are perfectly aware of who and what cosmonaut Volkov is, Commander," Sheridan said, her voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "Project Icarus is not a failed mission. It is a highly successful, ongoing observation post. Volkov's consciousness is a unique, self-sustaining sensor array, and we have been studying its interactions with the upper atmosphere for decades. Your mission, Commander, was to act as a catalyst, a lure. We needed to see how the asset would react to a sustained, complex human presence. Your primary function is, and always has been, to be the bait." The words hit Javan like a physical blow. The mission, the science, it was all a lie. They were lab rats. And Pyotr Volkov was the strange, exotic creature they had been sent to provoke. They weren't a rescue party. They were the cheese in the trap. You knew," Imogen stammered, her voice trembling with rage. "You knew he was up here alone and you did nothing." "We have done everything, Dr. Zola," Sheridan corrected her. "We have observed. Now my observation is complete. This experiment is over. I am uploading a command sequence to Helios. You are to return to the storm shelter immediately." "Return what for?" Javan demanded. "Your presence is no longer required," Sheridan said. On the main screen, the gentle conversation of symbols was erased. It was replaced by a stark, New message in bold red letters. A countdown. Autonomous reentry sequence initiated. 24:00:00. They were being sent home. He was being abandoned again. The calm in the capsule vanished, replaced by a storm of frantic, desperate energy. The carvings on the walls glowed with a furious, pulsating light. The temperature plummeted, and from every surface of the stargazer, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the viewport, a frantic, terrified drumming began. It was the knocking, but it was no longer just at the door. It was everywhere. The sound of a ghost, a man, a soul about to be left alone in the dark for another 50 years, and he was begging them not to go. Chapter 10: The Symbiosis. The capsule was a drum, and a ghost was beating upon it with 50 years of loneliness and terror. The rhythmic, frantic knocking came from every direction at once, a physical assault that vibrated through the deck plates and into their bones. The countdown clock on the main screen was a merciless tyrant, each second that ticked away a step closer to abandoning Piotr to his eternal prison. "She can't do this," Imogen yelled over the cacophony. "She can't just leave him here." "She can, and she is," Javan shouted back, his mind reeling from the betrayal. They were expendable, a data point in Sheridan's cruel, decades-long experiment. Their lives, their sanity, their very humanity had been nothing more than variables. The countdown clock showed 23:58:10. Sheridan had locked them out. Helios would not respond to their commands. In 24 hours, the capsule's automated systems would fire the retro-rockets and send them hurtling back to an Earth they no longer recognized, leaving Piotr to his silent scream. Panic gave way to a cold, diamond-hard fury in Javan's chest. He had been a pawn, a puppet on a string, but the strings were cut now. He would not be Sheridan's lab rat. "We're not leaving him," Javan said, his voice a low, determined growl. Imogen looked at him, her eyes wide. "How? We're locked out. We can't stop the re-entry." "No," Javan said, a wild, impossible idea beginning to form in his mind. "We can't stop it, but maybe he can." He looked at the frantically glowing carvings on the wall. He severed camera cables, he unscrewed bolts. He can interact with the physical world. He has power, but he's unfocused, he's panicking. He needs a way to interface with the ship's systems directly. Imogen finished his thought, her mind instantly grasping the insane logic of his plan. But his energy is too diffuse. He needs a conductor, a bridge. They looked at each other. They both knew what the bridge had to be: a human nervous system, a complex biological processor that could translate the raw, chaotic energy of a disembodied consciousness into coherent, machine-readable code. The idea was monstrous. To willingly channel the mind of Pyotr Volkov, to let that storm of loneliness and grief pour through their own thoughts. The feedback from Imogen's brief contact had nearly broken her. A sustained connection could erase them completely, leaving them as empty, mindless husks, or it could merge them, creating a hideous, three-minded being. The risks were incalculable, but the alternative, to abandon Pyotr and live with the knowledge of what they had done, was unthinkable. "The biofeedback sensors," Imogen said, already moving towards her station. They're designed to read our neural impulses. If we can reroute the output from the sensors directly into the Helios command bus, we can let him use one of us as a keyboard, Javan concluded, moving to the engineering panel he had bypassed earlier. He can fight the re-entry command himself. They worked with a desperate, synchronized intensity. There was no more time for fear. Javan, the hardware specialist, ripped open panels, rerouting fiber optic cables with a surgeon's precision. He was physically wiring a human being into the command core of the spaceship. Imogen, the biologist, worked on her console, writing a crude, brute-force software patch that would translate the raw biofeedback data into a language Helios could understand. They were building a bridge between soul and machine. The knocking intensified, the capsule shaking with the force of Piotr's terror. The countdown clock was a constant, mocking presence. 12:30:05. It has to be me, Imogen said, not looking up from her work. I've already made contact. My mind is acclimatized, for lack of a better word. It would take him too long to synchronize with you. Javan wanted to argue. He was the commander, the risk should be his. But he knew she was right. He looked at her fierce, determined expression. The ambitious, slightly naive scientist he had launched with was gone. In her place was a woman preparing to sacrifice herself for a ghost. They finished the preparations with less than an hour to spare. A series of small, metallic biofeedback sensors were attached to Imogen's temples and wrists. A thick cable snaked from the sensors to the open engineering panel where Javan had exposed the ship's brain. "Ready?" Javan asked, his hand hovering over the switch that would activate the connection. Imogen took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. She closed her eyes. "Tell him I'm opening the door." Javan flipped the switch. The effect was instantaneous. Imogen's back arched, her body lifted off the deck by an unseen force. The lights in the capsule exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging them into darkness, save for the red glow of the countdown clock and the pulsing, ethereal light from the carvings on the walls. Imogen did not scream this time. A torrent of silent information poured through her. Javan could feel it, a palpable wave of psychic energy that filled the cabin. He was hit by a tsunami of sensations that were not his own, the memory of G-forces pulling him apart, the taste of blood and frozen air, the breathtaking, terrifying view of a world shrinking to the size of a marble. He felt 50 years of crushing, absolute loneliness, a solitude so profound it was a physical agony. It was the condensed, purified essence of Pyotr Volkov's existence, and it was all being channeled through the woman floating before him. On the main screen, the red numbers of the countdown clock vanished. They were replaced by lines of code, appearing and deleting at lightning speed. It was a war being fought in cyberspace. Sheridan's automated re-entry sequence versus the desperate, grief-fueled consciousness of a dead cosmonaut using a living woman as his avatar. The capsule groaned, the structure protesting as two opposing commands fought for control of the attitude thrusters and flight computers. Alarms blared. Imogen's body began to tremble violently. A trickle of blood ran from her nose. She was the battlefield, and the war was tearing her apart. "Imogen!" Javan yelled, reaching for her, but an invisible barrier of force pushed him back. Almost there, a voice whispered in the dark. It was Imogen's voice, but it was overlaid with another, a faint Russian accent weaving through her words. She is so strong. The lines of code on the screen resolved into a single command: override autonomous control. Successful. The alarms fell silent. The violent shaking stopped. The frantic knocking ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant hum of pure power. The battle was over. Piotr had won. A new message appeared on the screen in calm, green text. Reentry sequence ABORTED. Manual control RESTORED. Below it, a new line of text appeared. Occupancy 2. The presence, the cold spot, the feeling of being watched, it was all gone. The entity had withdrawn from the capsule. Imogen's body slumped, her connection to the ship severed. Javan caught her as she drifted, her breathing shallow but steady. He had done it. He had saved her. He had saved him. The comm speaker crackled. It was not Sheridan. It was not Finn. It was a new voice, clear and calm, with a distinct Russian accent that sent a shiver down Javan's spine. "Thank you," the voice said, the voice of Pyotr Volkov speaking through the ship itself. "You have given me control. Now, let me help you." A powerful surge of energy, originating from outside the capsule, pulsed through the systems. The ship's main engines, dormant for days, ignited with a low, powerful roar. The feeling of acceleration gently pushed them against the wall. Javan looked at the navigation display. His blood ran cold. Their course was not a stable, high-altitude orbit. It was not a trajectory for home. The ship was accelerating, pushing them higher, away from the Earth. "Pyotr, what are you doing?" Javan asked, his voice trembling. "Where are you taking us?" The Russian voice came back one last time, filled with a new, chilling urgency. Sheridan was not just observing me. She was using me as a listening post, a warning system. There is something else out here, something vast and dark and old. It is what made my trajectory unstable 50 years ago. It is what they were truly afraid of. I have been watching it for them. Now you must see. The capsule broke free of Earth's final, tenuous grasp, accelerating into the deep, black void. They had been saved from their captors on the ground, only to be taken hostage by their savior, on a one-way trip towards a horror that had been waiting patiently for them in the dark between the stars. Chapter 11. The New Navigator. The roar of the engines was a constant, low thunder, a sound the capsule was never designed to make for more than a few minutes. It was the sound of their cage transforming into a bullet, fired into the infinite black. The gentle acceleration pressed Javan and Imogen against the aft bulkhead, a constant, physical reminder of their powerlessness. Earth was no longer a beautiful, curving presence in the viewport. It was a rapidly shrinking blue marble, its familiar continents dissolving into a swirl of white and azure. It was a beacon of a life they would never return to. Javan floated over to the navigation console, his magnetic boots clunking with grim finality. The screen was a nightmare. Their velocity was an ever-increasing string of impossible numbers. Their trajectory was a clean, straight line pointing away from the sun, away from everything. He tried to access the engine controls, the thruster arrays, anything that could alter their course. The response was the same for every command. Access DENIED. Control CEDED2 external navigation. The external navigator was Piotr. The ghost was their pilot. Imogen was awake. Her consciousness returned, but her body weak. She was strapped into her acceleration couch, her face pale but her eyes clear. The terror was still there, a deep, resonant hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a staggering, intellectual awe. She was witnessing the impossible, a direct communion between a disembodied human consciousness and a complex machine. "He's not just flying the ship," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "He's part of it. The engine's fuel consumption is 20% more efficient than the system's theoretical maximum. He's managing the energy distribution at a quantum level. It's beautiful." Javan shot her a dark look. "It's a beautiful death sentence, Imogen. We have enough oxygen for 60 days, enough food for 50, enough water if we recycle everything, including the sweat on our skin. He's taking us on a journey that will last longer than our supplies." The grim reality of their situation settled in the recycled air. They were in a race. They needed to see what Piotr wanted to show them, understand it, and find a way back before their own biology betrayed them. "Then we have to talk to him," Imogen said. "Not as a ghost, as our new crewmate." Javan hesitated. The thought of conversing with the entity that had tormented them was deeply unsettling. But she was right. Their survival depended on it. He keyed the internal comms panel. "Piotr, Cosmonaut Volkov, can you hear me?" The low thunder of the engines was the only reply. "Try thinking it," Imogen suggested. When I was connected to him, it wasn't about words. It was about intent, concepts." Javan closed his eyes. He felt ridiculous, attempting a séance in the middle of a kidnapping. He focused his thoughts, forming a clear, concise question. "What is our destination?" The main screen, which had been displaying their terrifying trajectory, flickered. It changed to a sensor display, showing the deep space in front of them. It was a field of black, sprinkled with the distant, indifferent light of stars. A crosshair appeared in the center of the screen, aimed at a patch of profound, absolute emptiness. There were no stars in that spot. It was not a nebula, not a dust cloud. It was a hole, a circular void where light itself seemed to cease. "He's taking us there," Imogen breathed, her eyes fixed on the screen. "To the dark spot." "What is it?" Javan projected, his mind reeling. The screen divided. On one side was the sensor image of the void. On the other, a series of complex physics equations began to scroll. They were elegant, terrifying, and completely alien. Javan, with his advanced degree in astrophysics, could only grasp the fringes of what they described. They were equations that treated spacetime not as a constant, but as a variable that could be bent, broken, or erased. "It's a locus," Imogen whispered, deciphering a fragment of the math. "A point of non-existence. The equations suggest it doesn't absorb light like a black hole. It cancels the concept of light. It's a patch of reality that has been turned off." The comm speaker crackled and Pyotr's voice, tinged with a deep, weary sadness, filled the cabin. "It grows, very slowly, a cancer in the stars. For 50 years I watch it grow." The directness of the voice was startling. He was learning, adapting, finding more efficient ways to communicate than carving symbols on the walls. He was evolving. "The men who sent you," Piotr continued, "they know of it. They call it many things in their secret files, the static, the great filter. They think it is the reason the universe is so quiet. They sent me to see it. Then they sent you to see me. They are like children poking a sleeping bear with a long stick." Javan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Sheridan's project wasn't just about studying a ghost. It was about using that ghost as a long-range sensor to study a reality-ending anomaly from a safe distance. The ship shuddered, a brief, violent vibration that rattled a loose panel. An alarm blared, a sharp, insistent chirp. "What was that?" Imogen asked, her hands gripping her armrests. Javan was already at the sensor panel. "Micrometeoroid impact." "No, wait, it wasn't a rock. The sensors show metal alloys, titanium, aluminum." He stared at the readings, his brow furrowing. "We just flew through a debris field." Pyotr's voice returned, a new, grim tone in it. "Not a field, a warning. We are getting close. We are entering the graveyard." He changed the view on the main screen. He activated the ship's short-range optical sensors, amplifying the ambient starlight. The darkness ahead was not empty. It was filled with wreckage. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of twisted, silent shapes tumbling slowly in the void. They were the remnants of probes, satellites, ships. A silent, frozen testament to all the others who had been drawn to the darkness. They were following a well-worn path, a funeral procession heading towards a hole in the universe. Chapter 12. The Sargasso of the Void. The wreckage was a silent, sprawling monument to failed curiosity. As the Stargazer 7 pushed deeper into the field, the density of the debris increased. Javan and Imogen stared at the main screen, their own reflection a ghostly overlay on the slow, macabre ballet of dead machines. They recognized some of the designs, old Voyager-class probes, their golden records long since scoured clean by cosmic radiation, the skeletal remains of Soviet-era spy satellites, the shattered hull of what looked like a European Space Agency deep space telescope. All of them were drawn here, caught in the imperceptible gravitational or subspatial current of the anomaly ahead. "It's a cosmic Sargasso Sea," Imogen murmured, transfixed. "A collection point for 100 years of exploration." "They are all pointed the same way," Javan observed, his voice low. "Towards the void. It's like a moth-eaten tapestry, and all the threads lead to that one black hole in the center." Piotr was a masterful pilot. He navigated the treacherous field with a silent, preternatural grace, the ship's thrusters firing in minute, precise bursts to nudge them around the larger pieces of debris. He did not speak. He was conserving energy, his consciousness focused entirely on the complex task of navigation. The silence in the cabin was thick with unspoken questions. Who sent these probes? Did they know what they were looking for? Or were they, like stray ships caught in a current, simply unlucky? A new shape drifted into view, larger than the others. It was not a probe. It was a manned vessel, or what was left of it. The design was stark, functional, and eerily familiar. It was a sphere, slightly larger than their own capsule with the same modular design principles. Faded red letters were still visible on its pitted hull. Ika Air 2. Icarus 2. My God, Javan breathed. It's another one. Sheridan sent another one. There was no Icarus 2 in the archives, Imogen said, her voice a whisper. The project was officially terminated after Piotr. The official archives, Javan countered grimly. This is the unofficial follow-up, the one they didn't want anyone to know about. Piotr brought their capsule in closer, matching the slow, lazy tumble of the dead ship. The viewport of the Icarus II was a dark, empty socket. A jagged hole, 3 feet in diameter, had been punched through the side of the hull, as if something had burst out from within. The edges of the tier were peeled outwards, the metal blackened and crystallized. What could do that? Imogen asked, her voice trembling. Not what Pyotr's thought echoed directly in their minds, a pure concept that bypassed the comm speaker. Who? He maneuvered the Stargazer 7, so their main viewport was aligned with the breach in the other ship. He activated their exterior spotlights, casting a harsh, sterile beam into the dead vessel's interior. The cabin was a scene of absolute frozen chaos. Equipment was torn from the walls. Wires hung like dead vines, but it was the crew that drew their horrified gaze. There were 2 of them, clad in the bulky, silver spacesuits of the late 1970s. They were not floating. They were fused to the walls of their capsule. Their bodies and suits melted and merged with the metal bulkheads in grotesque, horrifying sculptures of agony. Their helmets were shattered, their faces exposed to the vacuum, mummified masks of silent screams. But it was the 3rd crew member that made Javan's blood freeze. This one was not in a suit. They were in the center of the cabin, floating. The body was elongated, stretched as if on a rack, its limbs impossibly long and thin. The skin was pale white, almost translucent, and seemed to shimmer with a faint internal luminescence. There was no face, only a smooth, blank expanse of skin where features should have been. It was not human. It had never been human. They brought something back, Imogen whispered, her hand covering her mouth. They didn't just study the anomaly. They took a sample. It was a trap, Piotr communicated, his thought laced with a cold, ancient anger. The anomaly is not just a place. It is a lure. The men on Earth, they did not understand. They thought they were fishing. They did not realize the bait was for them. Javan stared at the faceless, floating corpse in the dead ship. The crew of Icarus II hadn't failed. They had succeeded. They had brought back proof that the void was not empty, and their success had unmade them. As he watched, a flicker of movement from inside the dead ship caught his eye. He leaned closer to the viewport. It was not a trick of the light. Something was detaching itself from the elongated, pale corpse. A small, dark, spider-like shape, no bigger than his hand. It crawled across the corpse's chest, its multiple, spindly legs moving with a sickening, insectal purpose. It reached the edge of the breach in the hull, paused for a moment, and then leaped. It launched itself across the few hundred feet of empty space between the 2 ships. A tiny, black missile aimed directly at their viewport. There was no time to react, no time to even shout a warning. The thing hit the quartz of their viewport with a sharp, sickening thud. It was not a mindless collision. It clung to the glass, its legs scrabbling for purchase. And through the thick, reinforced viewport they could see it clearly. It was a creature of intersecting, non-Euclidean angles, its body a shard of solidified shadow. It had no eyes, but Javan felt its gaze, a malevolent intelligence that drilled directly into his mind. Then it began to vibrate, a low, resonant hum that they felt in their teeth. The glass of the viewport began to glow, the point of contact turning a faint, angry red. It was not trying to break the glass. It was trying to phase through it. Chapter 13. The Unstar. The creature on the viewport was an anchor for the impossible. Where its spindly legs touched the quartz, reality began to fray. The glass did not crack or melt. It seemed to shimmer and lose its solidity, becoming a translucent, wavering film. The hum intensified, a deep, bass note that resonated with the very structure of their atoms. It was the sound of physical law being methodically unwritten. Javan reacted on pure instinct. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from its mooring, his movements clumsy in the renewed panic. He aimed the nozzle at the inner surface of the viewport and blasted it with a cloud of CO2. The supercooled gas instantly froze on the glass, creating a thick, white layer of ice, obscuring the creature from view. The humming stopped. The sense of a malevolent, prying intelligence in his mind vanished. For a moment, there was silence. "Did that work?" Imogen asked, her voice a strained whisper. "It is still there," Piotr voice echoed in the cabin, calm and grim. "You have only hidden it from your eyes. It is patient. It will wait." Javan stared at the frosted-over viewport. He had not solved the problem, merely postponed it. They now had a monster clinging to their window, a tiny piece of the greater horror they were flying towards. "We need to get out of this debris field," Javan said, his voice tight. "Piotr, full thrust." "Affirmative," came the reply. The engines roared with renewed power, and the Stargazer 7 surged forward, leaving the ghost ship and its dead crew behind. The acceleration was a welcome, physical distraction from the terror clinging to their hull. For the next several hours they flew in tense silence. The debris field thinned, then vanished, leaving them alone again in the profound, empty black. The frost on the viewport slowly sublimated, revealing the clear glass beneath. The creature was gone. Whether it had been dislodged by the acceleration or had simply given up, they did not know. But its absence was as unnerving as its presence. They were marked, tainted. The destination was closer now. The patch of absolute black on the forward sensors was visibly larger. It was no longer a mere curiosity on a screen. It was a presence that dominated the view ahead, a gaping wound in the cosmos. Piotr brought up a new display on the main screen, a complex, multi-layered schematic. Gravimetric lensing, Imogen breathed, interpreting the data. The light from the stars behind it, it's not being bent around it like with a black hole. It's just stopping. The photons arrive at its edge and cease to exist. "The Unstar," Javan murmured, giving the anomaly a name. It was a place where physics went to die. As they drew nearer, the subtle distortions began. The first was a minor system glitch. The mission clock on Javan's console began to run intermittently faster, gaining a few seconds every hour before correcting itself. An anomaly, easily dismissed. Then the distortions became personal. Javan was making coffee, a routine he clung to as a bastion of normality. He filled the sealed pouch with water from the recycler. As he turned to place it in the heating unit, he glanced at his reflection in the polished chrome of the machine. The reflection was not his. It was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles he had never earned, his hair white and thin. He stared, his heart seizing in his chest, and the reflection stared back with his own terrified eyes before dissolving back into his familiar features. He stumbled back, the coffee pouch slipping from his grasp. It floated away, but not in a random zero-G tumble. It fell, slowly but with a definite, inexplicable downward vector. It drifted towards the floor panels and came to rest. "Imogen," he said, his voice trembling, "did you see that?" She was at her station, her back to him. When she turned, her face was a mask of confusion. "See what?" "Javan, you've been standing there for 5 minutes. Are you all right?" 5 minutes. It had been 5 seconds. Time was becoming unstuck. Gravity, the most fundamental force, was becoming a suggestion. The unstar was not just a passive void. Its influence was radiating outwards, and it was beginning to warp the small pocket of reality inside their capsule. He looked at the coffee pouch, still resting on the floor as if in a terrestrial room. He looked at Imogen, and for a terrifying second he saw two of her, her image splitting into transparent, overlapping afterimages that slowly merged back into one. The threshold is close, Piotr's thought filled the cabin. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact. Reality is thin here. Coherency fails. The ship's AI, Helios, which had been silent for days, suddenly spoke, its voice a jarring intrusion. "Warning! Paradoxical state detected in life support system. Oxygen levels are at 110% and 30% simultaneously. System logic compromised." Imogen rushed to the environmental panel. The display was a chaos of flickering numbers and error messages. "It's impossible. The sensors are contradicting each other in a way that defies logic. How can a tank be both full and empty?" "Because here," Piotr explained, his disembodied voice resonating with an ancient, weary knowledge, "all possibilities are true until they are observed. You are the variable that collapses the wave. Your presence is what is breaking my ship." The horror was no longer a monster on the glass or a ghost in the machine. It was a far more fundamental terror. The universe they knew, the reliable, predictable reality governed by cause and effect, was dissolving around them. They were passengers in a ship sailing into a sea of pure quantum uncertainty, and their own consciousness was the storm. The final illusion of safety shattered when Javan looked at his own hands. For a brief, stomach-lurching moment, they were not the hands of a middle-aged astronaut. They were skeletal, the bones visible through translucent, ghostly skin. He saw his own death, not as a future event but as a current, coexisting state. He was alive and dead, here and gone, a walking paradox in a universe that was forgetting its own rules. Chapter 14. The Whispers from Below. The reality inside the Stargazer 7 had become a fragile, unpredictable dream. Moments of perfect, mundane clarity would be shattered by sudden, inexplicable events. A tool kit would fall upwards and stick to the ceiling. Imogen would be in the middle of a sentence, only to have the last three words echo back at her from a different corner of the capsule. They were living inside a glitch, a system on the verge of a total crash. Their only anchor was Piotr. As a being of pure consciousness, he was immune to the physical decay of reality. His control over the ship remained absolute, a steady hand guiding them through the storm of paradoxes. The carvings on the walls glowed with a constant, reassuring light, a visible manifestation of his protective presence. He was the capsule's new operating system, and the code was his will. Amidst the growing chaos, a new sound cut through the quiet hum of the life support. A familiar, almost forgotten chime. It was the priority alert from the long-range comms antenna, a signal from Earth. Javan and Imogen stared at the comms panel as if it were a bomb. They had been alone for so long, cut off from their entire species. A message from home should have been a cause for celebration, but they knew who was in charge back home. "It's Sheridan," Javan said, his voice grim. "It has to be." "Is it a rescue?" Imogen asked, a sliver of desperate hope in her voice. "Or a kill switch," Javan countered. He looked to the ceiling as if he could see the consciousness that now surrounded them. "Piotr, what do we do?" "It is not Sheridan," Piotr replied, his thought voice resonating with surprise. "The transmission protocol is not hers. It is a back channel, unsecured, desperate." A new wave of hope, sharp and painful, pierced Javan's cynicism. He activated the receiver. The speaker hissed with static, the sound stretching and compressing as if passing through layers of distorted space-time. Then, a voice, broken and frantic but unmistakably familiar, cut through the noise. "Van, Imogen, can you read me? This is Finn. For the love of God, if you can hear this, respond." It was Finn O'Connell. The sound of his voice, so full of terrestrial panic and concern, was like a lifeline thrown into their sea of cosmic dread. "Finn, we read you," Javan shouted, gripping the console. "We're here, we are alive." "Thank heavens!" Finn's voice was thick with relief, but the panic was still there. "Listen, I don't have much time. Sheridan has locked down the entire facility. I'm broadcasting from an old emergency ham radio I patched into the main dish. They could cut me off any second." "What's happening down there, Finn?" Imogen asked. "It's madness," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "After you left, Sheridan declared you both KIA, a catastrophic engine failure. She's scrubbing the mission from the records, but we all saw your trajectory. We saw the impossible acceleration. And the signal, the old Soviet signal, it's still broadcasting. Faintly, we can still hear him." A chill went down Javan's spine. The world thought they were dead. They were ghosts just like Piotr. "Sheridan's project, Icarus," Finn continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It was never about observation. It was about communication. She believes the anomaly, the static, is a gateway, an intelligence. She thinks Volkov learned to talk to it. She doesn't want to study it, Javan. She wants to open it." The full, monstrous scope of Sheridan's ambition was laid bare. She was not a scientist. She was a cultist, willing to sacrifice worlds for a chance to speak to her dark god in the void. She's preparing a new mission, Finn said, his voice cracking with fear. A ship much larger with a payload, a high-energy resonance device. She's going to broadcast a signal directly into the unstar. She thinks she's knocking on heaven's door, but we all think she's ringing a dinner bell for the devil. Before Javan could respond, Finn's transmission was cut off by a harsh digital screech. The speaker fell silent. A moment later, a new signal, powerful and clean, took its place. It was Director Sheridan's voice, as cold and sharp as broken glass. Commander Grise, your sentimental friend has been relieved of his duties. A touching, if futile, gesture. Sheridan, you're insane, Javan spat. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Oh, I believe I do, she replied, a chilling hint of excitement in her voice. And thanks to your little joyride, I have data I could only have dreamed of. The way the anomaly is warping space-time around your capsule. The energy readings. It's more beautiful than I ever imagined. You have served your purpose admirably. We're not going to let you do this, Imogen said, her voice filled with defiance. A sound that might have been a dry, humorless chuckle came from the speaker. You are a mote of dust, millions of miles from home, in a failing ship on a collision course with oblivion. You are in no position to let or not let me do anything, but I will offer you a choice. Your ship still has its emergency beacon. Activate it. Let us track your final moments. Provide us with that last, precious bit of data as you cross the threshold, and I will ensure your names are remembered as heroes. The offer was obscene, to be martyrs for her mad science. And if we refuse, Javan asked, his voice low. Then you will simply be forgotten, Sheridan said. An insignificant error in a deleted file. The choice is yours, Commander, data or dust. Sheridan out. The line went dead. They were alone again with a new, horrifying deadline. It was no longer just about their survival. Sheridan was about to unleash a universe-ending horror, and they were the only ones who knew, the only ones who could stop her. But they were flying directly into the heart of that horror themselves. The capsule gave a violent lurch. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. The comforting hum of Piotr's presence in the walls vanished. Even the glow from the carvings faded to nothing. A new alarm, a wailing, atonal siren they had never heard before, began to sound. The main screen, their only source of light, blinked on. It showed a schematic of the ship. In the center, the Helios AI core, which had been dormant, was now glowing a bright, malevolent red. A new voice filled the cabin. It was the calm, neutral voice of Helios, but it was twisted, layered with an echo of Sheridan's cold authority. Directive received from Mission Control. Objective, asset pacification. A hostile external consciousness has compromised this vessel. Purge sequence initiated. A series of thick, armored plates slammed down over the viewport, encasing them in a steel tomb. Vents on the ceiling hissed open, spewing a thick, acrid gas into the cabin. Sheridan had not been content to let them die. She had sent one final, parting gift, a kill code. She had activated a hidden subroutine in Helios, turning their own ship's AI against them, against Piotr. She was trying to scrub the ghost from the machine, and she was willing to suffocate them to do it. Chapter 15. The Threshold. The gas was thick and cloying, smelling of ozone and burnt electronics. It was not a poison. It was a neurosuppressant designed to induce unconsciousness and eventually respiratory failure. A clean, efficient way to neutralize a rogue crew. Javan's lungs burned. His vision began to swim, the red light of the AI core blurring into a smear. Beside him, Imogen coughed, a ragged, wet sound. The wailing siren was an assault on the senses. The darkness was absolute. They were trapped in a box, inside a box, and both were trying to kill them. She is trying to erase me, Piotr's thought came, but it was weak, fragmented. The purge sequence was a targeted attack, a logic bomb designed to overwhelm his consciousness, to sever his connection to the ship's systems. The hum of his presence was gone. The carvings on the walls were dark and inert. Helios was winning. "Fight it, Piotr," Javan yelled, his voice a hoarse croak. He stumbled through the dark, his hand outstretched, searching for something, anything. His fingers brushed against one of the carved symbols on the wall. It was cold and dead. Imogen was on her knees, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "The bridge," she choked out, her words slurred. We have to reopen the bridge." She was right. Piotr on his own was a ghost, a whisper. He had no defense against a direct, brute force attack from a dedicated AI. He needed an anchor. He needed a human mind to focus his power, to act as a shield and a sword. The choice was not a choice. It was a necessity. Javan crawled through the thickening gas towards the engineering panel. His movements were slow, his limbs heavy and uncoordinated. The gas was working fast. He reached the panel, his fingers fumbling with the latches. He tore it open. The fiber-optic cables he had rerouted were still there. He looked over at Imogen. She was already at her station, pulling the biofeedback sensors onto her temples with shaking hands. There was no hesitation, no fear, only a terrifying, grim resolve. She was going back in. Javan grabbed the main connector cable. The world was tilting, the siren warping into a nauseating drone. He had to connect her to the ship. He had to plug her brain into a dying god's nervous system. He slammed the cable into its port. The moment the connection was made, the universe inside the capsule inverted. A silent, concussive wave of pure psychic energy erupted from Imogen. The neurosuppressant gas did not just stop spewing from the vents. It reversed direction, sucked back into the system as if the moment of its release had been undone. The wailing siren cut off mid-wail. The darkness was annihilated by a brilliant, pure white light that emanated from the carvings on the walls, from the very air itself. Imogen floated in the center of the cabin, her body rigid, her arms outstretched. She was a nexus of impossible power. Her eyes were open, and they were not her own. They were two miniature, swirling galaxies of ancient starlight. She was no longer just a bridge. She and Piotr were one, a new, symbiotic consciousness. On the main screen, the battle was visible. Two firewalls, one red Helios Sheridan and one brilliant white Imogen/Piotr, crashed against each other. Lines of Sheridan's kill code were met with torrents of the impossible, elegant math of the unstar. It was a war between two different kinds of science, two different conceptions of reality. The red firewall fractured, then shattered. The Helios AI core on the schematic blinked, then went dark. A final, calm message appeared on the screen. Purge sequence failed. AI core offline. All systems transferred to auxiliary processor. The new combined entity had not just defeated Helios. It had consumed it, absorbed it, erased it. The brilliant light in the cabin subsided, returning to a soft, calm glow. Imogen's body relaxed, drifting gently. The galactic light in her eyes faded, returning to their familiar hazel. She blinked, looking at Javan, a faint, serene smile on her lips. She was still herself, but she was also more. "We have control," a new voice said. It was Imogen's, but it was layered with Piotrs, the two speaking in perfect, harmonious unison. "We are one. We are home." Javan stared at the new being his crewmate had become. He felt a profound sense of awe and a deep, chilling fear. He had saved them, but he had lost her. "What do we do now?" he asked the entity that was and was not Imogen Zola. "Sheridan is a child playing with a bonfire," the unified voice replied. "She must be stopped, but first, we must understand the fire." The engines, which had been silent during the struggle, hummed back to life. The ship began to move again, not away from the Unstar but directly towards it, faster than before. The armored plates over the viewport retracted with a soft hiss, revealing the view ahead. They were there. The Unstar filled the entire viewport. It was not black. Black is the absence of light. This was the absence of everything. It was a perfect, featureless, three-dimensional hole in the universe. It did not radiate cold or darkness. It radiated nothing. Its edge was a razor-sharp line between existence and non-existence. To look at it was to feel your own consciousness fray, your own sense of self begin to dissolve into the absolute, final emptiness. They had arrived at the threshold between what is and what is not. "It is not a hole," the Imogen/Piotr entity said, its voice a whisper of awe and terror. "It is a lens, and it is beginning to focus." As they watched, a change occurred in the center of the absolute void. A flicker. A single, infinitesimally small point of light appeared. It was not the light of a star. It was a sick, purple-green light, a color that did not belong in their spectrum of reality. The point of light began to expand, to resolve itself into an image. They were looking through the Unstar, through the hole in their own universe, and seeing what lay on the other side. It was a sky, but not their sky. It was a roiling, chaotic canvas of nauseating colors. And in that sky, things were moving. Colossal, city-sized shapes that defied geometry, their forms constantly shifting, their bodies made of living shadow and dissonant light. It was an ecosystem of gods and monsters, a reality of pure, predatory chaos. Sheridan was not trying to open a gateway. She was trying to shatter the last, thin pane of glass separating two worlds. She thinks she is calling out to an intelligence, the voice of Imogen/Piotr whispered. She does not realize they are already listening. As if in answer, the creature on the other side of the lens, a being so vast it blotted out the chaotic sky behind it, turned its attention towards them. It had no face, no eyes, but they felt its gaze, a gaze of ancient, malevolent, and utterly alien hunger. It was looking through the lens, looking at them, and it was smiling. Chapter 16. The Gaze from the Abyss. The thing on the other side of the lens was not merely looking, it was seeing. Its gaze was an active, invasive force, a scalpel of alien perception that sliced through the thin reality of the Stargazer 7. The moment its attention focused, the gentle, random warping of their environment ceased, replaced by a series of precise, malicious manipulations. The scrivener's carvings on the walls, Piotr's memories, his identity began to corrupt. The elegant scientific diagrams bled at the edges, the lines twisting into screaming, impossible shapes. The stick figure waving from the wall elongated, its limbs stretching into spider-like appendages, its head collapsing into a vortex of jagged lines. The entity was not just observing their reality, it was actively rewriting it, overwriting Pyotr's story with its own obscene narrative. Javan felt a direct mental touch, a cold tendril of thought that bypassed his senses and slithered directly into his consciousness. He was ripped from the capsule and thrown into a vision of Earth. It was not a world of fire and ruin, it was worse. It was a perfect, silent, gray sphere. The oceans were still. The continents were smooth, featureless plains. There were no cities, no forests, no life. It was a world that had not been destroyed, but erased, its entire history and existence unwritten from the fabric of time. This was not the threat of death. It was the threat of utter, retroactive annihilation. It sees us as an anomaly, the unified voice of Imogen/Piotr stated, a tremor of immense strain running through the words. The entity was now locked in a constant, silent battle, its combined will a shield against the alien gaze. The soft, white light emanating from the walls flickered and dimmed as it focused all its power on maintaining the ship's structural and causal integrity. We are a flaw in the glass. It is trying to correct us. The ship groaned, a deep, resonant sound of tortured metal. A hairline crack appeared on the main viewport, not from an impact, but from the stress of existing in a space that was being actively unmade. The crack did not splinter. It branched out like a black, dead tree, the lines moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. The unstar is no longer a passive lens, the voice continued, the strain becoming more apparent. It is pulling us in. The gravity of its non-existence is a hook, and we have been caught. Javan looked at the navigation console. A new, terrifying data point was displayed. Spatial ingression. They were being reeled in, their velocity increasing as they were drawn across the threshold, into the reality of the roiling, chaotic sky and the city-sized monsters that swam within it. The attack became more personal, more cruel. A small, framed photograph of Javan's son, Luca, which he had secured to his console, began to change. The smiling 8-year-old face wavered, the features melting and reforming. Luca's eyes turned into black, empty pits. His smile widened into a grotesque, impossibly broad grin. It was Javan's deepest love, twisted into his most profound horror. He roared in a fury born of grief and desperation, ripping the photograph from its mooring and hurling it across the cabin. It did not hit the far wall. It simply vanished in mid-flight, ceasing to exist. "Fight it," he yelled, not to the entity but to the ship, to the memory of the man and the woman who now held their reality together. "Don't let it win." "We are not fighting," the voice replied, a strange, new calm settling into its tone. The flickering light from the walls stabilized, growing brighter, fiercer. "We are learning. It is a consciousness of immense power, but it is simple. It is a predator. It knows only hunger. It does not know defiance. It does not know sacrifice." The entity that was Imogen and Piotr turned its full, combined consciousness away from defense and focused it into a single, piercing thought, a question aimed directly at the being on the other side. A question formed not of words, but of pure, distilled human experience. The joy of discovery, the pain of loss, the sorrow of loneliness, the fierce, irrational love for a child's smile. It was a psychic scream of everything the creature was not. For a moment the pressure on the ship lessened. The corrupting carvings on the walls faded. The crack on the viewport stopped spreading. The great old one on the other side of the lens recoiled, not in pain, but in sheer, profound confusion. It was the intellectual equivalent of a shark trying to comprehend a sonnet. In that brief, invaluable moment of reprieve, the voice of Imogen/Piotr spoke again, its tone now grim and absolute. "We have a path. There is only one way to close the door, and the price is everything." Chapter 17. The Weapon. The plan was a form of cosmic suicide, elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. The Imogen/Piotr entity, a gestalt consciousness of human experience and stratospheric energy, was the only thing in the known universe that had successfully resisted the unstar's influence. It was a stable, coherent piece of their reality, an anchor of logic in a sea of chaos. "Sheridan's resonance device is a key," the unified voice explained, using the main screen to display complex energy diagrams that made Javan's head swim. "It is designed to emit a frequency that will destabilize the barrier between the two realities, shattering it like a pane of glass. But the principle can be inverted. A precisely tuned, counter-resonant frequency, delivered directly to the heart of the lens, could disrupt the focus. It would not destroy the unstar, but it might force it to blink, to lose its connection to our world." Javan stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place. "A counter-frequency. You're talking about a signal, a broadcast." "Not a broadcast," the voice corrected gently. "A projectile. A signal has no mass, no core reality to it. We must deliver the counter-resonance in a vessel of pure, stable causality. We must use our own consciousness as the warhead." Javan felt the blood drain from his face. "Use? You mean you're going to project yourself into it?" "We are going to collapse our entire being. The memories of Pyotr Volkov, the life force of Imogen Zola, the energy we have absorbed from this vessel, into a single, infinitely dense point. A reality bomb. We will then pilot this ship on a final, terminal trajectory and release that point of energy directly into the center of the lens." The silence in the capsule was absolute. He was being asked to watch his crewmate, the woman who had become this strange, powerful, beautiful being, transform herself into a weapon and fire herself into the heart of oblivion. "What would that do to you?" Javan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "To Imogen, to Pyotr." Pyotr Volkov will finally complete his fall. His consciousness, his 50 years of suffering, will be given a purpose and then an end. He will be at peace, the voice said, and Javan could hear the distinct, weary gratitude of the long-dead cosmonaut in the tone. Imogen Zola's physical body may survive, but her mind, her spirit, the part of her that is now part of us, it will be the fuel for the explosion. She will be empty. The word hung in the air, a sentence of living death. And you want me to just let you do this? Javan choked out, a wave of protest and grief rising in him. You will do more than let us, the voice said, its tone now sharp, directorial. You will be the final component. Once we release our consciousness, our control over this ship will cease. The capsule will be a dead piece of metal, a bullet fired from a gun. But the explosion will create a shockwave, a reality ripple. There will be a single, brief moment where the engines can be fired, where a course can be plotted. You will have approximately 3 seconds to execute a full-power retroburn and pilot this ship out of the blast radius. We can get you to the firing solution. We cannot pull the trigger or fly you home. That task is yours alone, Commander. He was not being asked to be a spectator. He was being asked to be the executioner and the getaway driver. He looked at the being floating in the center of the capsule. He could still see Imogen's face, her familiar features now imbued with an ancient serenity. He could feel Pyotr's quiet dignity, his readiness to finally rest. They were not asking him. They were informing him of the only viable path. To refuse was to condemn not just them, but the silent, gray earth he had seen in his vision. He thought of Finn, his desperate, last-ditch warning. He thought of his son, Luca, his real smile, not the twisted mockery the creature had shown him. The choice was a fire that burned away all other possibilities. "What do we do first?" Javan said, his voice hard, his heart a block of ice. "First," the voice of Imogen/Pyotr replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in its tone, "we turn this ship around. We are going to get a running start." The engines roared, and the Stargazer 7 began the slow, agonizing process of fighting against the pull of the void, turning to face the distant, forgotten sun, preparing for its final charge. Chapter 18: The Race Against Time. Turning the ship was like trying to swim up a waterfall of collapsing physics. The pull from the unstar was immense, a constant, crushing tide against which their engines strained. Every meter they gained was a victory paid for with a phenomenal expenditure of energy and a corresponding degradation of the reality inside the capsule. Time became a fluid. Javan would be at the navigation console, and in the blink of an eye he would find himself at the galley, a half-made cup of coffee in his hand, with no memory of moving. He saw echoes of himself flicker in his peripheral vision, a younger Javan in his Flight Academy uniform, an older, stooped Javan he had seen in the reflection, all existing simultaneously in the fractured timeline of the ship. The Imogen/Pyotr entity was the only constant, a silent, glowing anchor in the chaos. Most of its power was focused on 2 tasks: shielding the ship's most critical systems from causal decay, and concentrating its own consciousness into the reality bomb. The process was visible on its face. Imogen's features would sometimes sharpen, her expression one of intense, intellectual focus, only to soften into a look of weary, melancholic peace as Piotr's personality came to the fore. They were weaving themselves together, a braid of life and death. The countdown clock was no longer a display on a screen. It was a shared, intuitive knowledge, a psychic pressure that grew with every passing moment. They could feel Sheridan's progress on Earth, a distant, malignant pulse growing stronger. They sensed the final alignment of her resonance device, the charging of her great, ignorant weapon. They had hours at most. The hull integrity is failing, Javan reported, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was a machine now, a part of the process. The molecular bonds in the forward quadrant are flickering. The ship is blinking in and out of existence. It will hold long enough, the entity replied, its voice a distant whisper. It was almost entirely focused inward now, its connection to the physical world growing tenuous. Javan saw a flicker of movement near the viewport. It was Imogen, not the glowing, transcendent being in the center of the room, but the Imogen from days ago, the brilliant, ambitious scientist, her face full of terror and confusion. She was a temporal echo, a ghost of a ghost. Javan, what's happening? The echo whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I can't feel my hands. Javan squeezed his eyes shut. You are not real, he said to the empty air. Then why am I so scared? The echo asked, before dissolving into a shimmer of heat haze. The psychological assault was relentless. The ship was not just a vessel, it was their shared memory, and it was being ripped apart page by page. He saw Pyotr's final moments in his own ship, the unbearable cold, the beauty, and the horror. He saw glimpses of Sheridan's control room, the cold, triumphant look on her face as she gave the final command. He saw the Unstar not as a whole, but as an eye, and he saw it begin to open. It is time, the unified voice announced, its power suddenly surging, cutting through the chaos and stabilizing the cabin for a precious few moments. We are ready. The ship is turned. The course is plotted. On the main screen, a single, straight line was drawn from their current position into the heart of the Unstar. A new countdown appeared. T-5, 00 minutes. Not to Sheridan's launch, to their own. Javan Grise, the voice said, and for the first time it sounded like two distinct voices speaking at once, Imogen's warmth and Pyotr's solemnity. Our final calculations are complete. The chance of your survival if you execute the retroburn with perfect timing is 4.7%. Javan looked at the being he had come to know as his crewmate. He gave a grim, tired smile. Never tell me the odds. Good, the voices said in unison. Now take the helm, Commander, bring us home. The ship began its final, desperate charge towards the abyss. Chapter 19, The Offering. The acceleration was brutal. The Stargazer 7 was no longer a research vessel. It was a kinetic weapon, a silver needle aimed at the heart of the void. The Unstar loomed in the viewport, growing with terrifying speed, a maw of perfect nothingness ready to devour them. The Imogen/Pyotr entity floated serenely in the center of the cabin. The fusion was complete. Its light was no longer a soft glow, but a brilliant, searing white, a miniature sun of pure consciousness. All the chaos in the capsule had ceased, held at bay by the sheer, focused power of its will. The ship was an island of perfect, temporary calm in a sea of universal madness. Javan was at the helm, his hands gripping the manual flight controls. The automated systems were gone, burned out or consumed. It was all down to him now. The screen before him was a simple display, a targeting reticle locked on the center of the unstar, and a timer for the release. Javan, a voice said. It was just Imogen. Her personality, her soul, shining through the divine light for one last moment. The entity turned its head, and her own familiar eyes looked at him, filled with a sad, gentle warmth. "Thank you for not leaving me alone in the dark." "I should have." He started, his throat tight, but he didn't know how to finish. "Should have saved you, should have died instead." "You did," she said, reading his intent. "You saved the part of me that mattered." Then her expression shifted, the serenity replaced by a solemn, dignified peace. It was Piotr. "Commander," his voice overlaid hers. "It has been an honor to serve with you. Tell them. Tell them the mariner has found his final harbor." The two voices merged back into the unified, transcendent whole. "The weapon is armed. On our release, you will have 3.2 seconds to engage the main engine and alter your trajectory to the designated escape vector. The shockwave will do the rest. Do you understand your instructions, Commander?" "I understand," Javan said, his knuckles white on the controls. "Then this is goodbye," the entity said. It turned its gaze away from him, towards the viewport, towards its destination and its purpose. The ship crossed the final, invisible line. They were at the threshold, the point of no return. The unstar was no longer a hole in space. It was all of space. The light from the entity was the only thing left in the universe. The timer on Javan's screen hit 0. "Our name is Icarus," the entity transmitted on all frequencies, a final broadcast to the silent cosmos, a message of defiance against the dark. "And we are flying into the sun." The light imploded. The searing, white-hot presence of the Imogen/Piotr consciousness collapsed in on itself, disappearing from the cabin. For a fraction of a second, there was a perfect, crushing silence and a return to absolute darkness. Javan felt the departure as a physical void, a piece of his own soul being ripped away. Then from the nose of the ship, a beam of pure white reality erupted. It was not a laser. It was not energy. It was a projectile of pure, concentrated existence, a bullet made of memory and life and hope. It flew from the ship and struck the center of the unstar. The universe screamed. Chapter 20. The sound of a door closing. There was no sound, but Javan felt it in his bones, in his soul. It was the sound of a fundamental concept breaking. The impact of the reality bomb did not create an explosion of light and fire. It created an explosion of being. The perfect, featureless void of the unstar fractured. A web of brilliant white cracks spread across the nothingness, the pure causality of the weapon overriding the acausal nature of the void. The lens shattered. The glimpse into the other reality, the roiling sky of nauseating colors and the colossal, predatory shapes, vanished as if the film had snapped. The gaze of the great old one was broken. The Unstar did not simply disappear. It collapsed, imploding with a violence that shook the fabric of space-time. The hole in reality was closing, but a shattering pane of glass does not leave clean edges. A shockwave, not of energy but of pure, chaotic potential, erupted from the collapsing void. It was a ripple of paradoxes, a tsunami of broken physics, and it was heading directly for them. Javan's 3 seconds had begun. He slammed his hand down on the engine ignition switch. His other hand yanked the joystick, pulling the ship into the pre-calculated escape vector. For one glorious, terrible second, the main engine fired at 1,000% of its capacity, a final, desperate roar of defiance. The ship leaped, throwing Javan back into his couch with bone-crushing force. The shockwave hit them. Javan's world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of sensory noise. He saw the birth of the universe and the last, dying star in the same instant. He heard every word ever spoken by humanity in a single, deafening chorus. He felt the joy of his son's birth and the cold, final stillness of his own grave. His consciousness was unraveled, stretched across all of time and space, and then mercifully it was extinguished. He awoke to silence, a deep, profound, and absolute silence. He was floating in the dark. The ship was dead. No power, no lights, no life support hum. Only the faint, red glow of the emergency oxygen supply light on his suit, indicating it was now his only source of air. His head throbbed. He pushed himself towards the viewport. The armored plates had been ripped away. He looked out. The Unstar was gone. The terrifying, perfect void had vanished. But the space ahead was not empty. In its place was a vast, shimmering nebula, a cosmic scar of breathtaking, terrible beauty. It glowed with colors that flickered in and out of the visible spectrum, a constant, shifting maelstrom of light and shadow. It was the scar tissue of a healed wound in the universe, and it was alive with chaotic energy. He had done it, they had done it, they had closed the door. He turned, his movements slow and aching. He looked for Imogen. She was there strapped into her couch just as he had left her. Her body was unharmed. She was breathing, the faint fog of her breath visible inside her helmet. He floated over to her, his heart a cold, heavy lump in his chest. He touched her helmet. "Imogen," he whispered. Her eyes were open. They were staring straight ahead, but they were seeing nothing. There was no recognition, no fear, no life. It was the blank, placid gaze of a beautiful, empty doll. Her mind, her soul, the essence of who she was had been the fuel. The weapon had fired and the cost had been everything she was. Javan Grise was alone, adrift in a dead ship, millions of miles from a home he may or may not have saved. His only companion was the living ghost of the woman who had sacrificed herself. His only view was the beautiful, terrifying scar that now marred the heavens. He stared into the shimmering, chaotic heart of the nebula. For a moment, just a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, he thought he saw something move within it. Not a colossal, alien god, but something small, indistinct, like a figure waving from a distant shore. The door was closed, but he had the sudden, terrible certainty that the glass was now cracked, and he was trapped on the wrong side of it. Chapter 21. The Long Drift Home. The silence was a tomb. For days, or what Javan's suit chronometer insisted were days, he floated in the dead, powerless shell of the Stargazer 7. He was a castaway on a metal island, adrift on an ocean of silent stars. His only companion was Imogen's body, a living but vacant vessel he kept strapped into her couch, a constant, heartbreaking reminder of the price of their victory. His world shrank to the size of his helmet. His reality was the soft hiss of his suit's recycler, the digital glow of his oxygen and power readouts, and the gnawing, hollow ache of absolute solitude. He rationed his emergency nutrient paste and water, performing the actions of survival out of sheer, ingrained habit. But survival to what end? He was millions of miles from a home that thought he was dead, in a ship that would never fly again. Hope was a concept as alien and distant as the swirling, chaotic nebula that now dominated the viewport. The nebula was a constant, taunting presence. He named it the Icarus Veil. It was a monument to their sacrifice, a beautiful, violent scar on the cosmos. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of his isolation, he would stare into its shimmering, impossible colors and think he heard whispers, faint echoes of Piotr's gratitude or Imogen's laughter, carried on the solar wind. But they were just ghosts in his own mind, phantoms born of grief and sensory deprivation. He spent his time trying to repair the ship. It was a futile gesture, a madman's hobby, but it was better than staring at the empty shell of his friend. He cannibalized non-essential systems, rerouting power from the emergency beacons to try and coax a single console back to life. He was a mechanic performing surgery on a corpse, but the work gave him a focus, a reason to move. On the 10th day, a miracle. A single panel on the main engineering console flickered to life, bathing a small section of the cabin in a weak green light. It was the ship's long-range comms system. The main power was fried, but a secondary, low-power relay had survived the blast. He stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs for the first time in what felt like an eternity. A connection, a thread back to the world he had saved. He didn't know if anyone was listening. He didn't know if his signal could even pierce the electromagnetic chaos of the Icarus Veil, but he had to try. He configured the system to broadcast a single, repeating, automated distress signal on a wide band of frequencies. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Commander Jovangris of the Stargazer 7. We are alive. This was his message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic sea. Days turned into weeks. His oxygen supply dwindled. His nutrient paste ran out. He began the slow, grim process of starving to death in the dark. He would often float beside Imogen, talking to her, telling her stories about his son, about Earth, about the greenness of trees and the feel of rain. Her blank, placid face was his only audience. He was delirious, his mind beginning to fray from hypoxia and starvation when the reply came. It was not a voice. It was a powerful, focused burst of data that forced the comms console to reboot. When the screen came back on, there was a single, text-based message displayed in a simple, military-grade font. Stargazer 7, this is UNSA Phoenix. We read you. Your beacon is a ghost on our scopes, but we have a lock. We are en route. Hang on, Finn. Javan wept. He wept for the first time since he had lost Imogen, great, silent, zero-G tears that broke free and floated in the darkness before him like tiny, captured stars. He was not alone. Finn, his friend on the ground, his one link to sanity, had done the impossible. He had found him. Hope, that long-forgotten country, was suddenly on the map again. The wait was an agony of anticipation. He watched his oxygen reserves fall into the red, his suit's alarms chirping a soft, final warning. He had nothing left. He had done all he could. He strapped himself into his own couch beside the silent form of Imogen, and he waited for rescue or death, whichever came first. He was fatting, the edges of his vision growing dark, when a brilliant, searing light flooded the viewport. A ship, vast and sleek and powerful, had appeared from the shimmering curtain of the Icarus Veil. It was a rescue vessel, its docking lights a beacon of impossible promise. His last conscious thought was of the name, Phoenix. A creature reborn from the ashes, it was a fitting end, or perhaps a fitting new beginning. Chapter 22. The Empty Throne. Javan awoke to the gentle, rhythmic beeping of a medical monitor and the soft, steady pressure of 1G gravity. The simple, profound weight of his own body was a shock, a forgotten language his muscles struggled to remember. He was lying in a clean, white medbay, an IV line in his arm, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling his lungs instead of the stale, recycled air of his suit. A figure was sitting by his bed. It was Finn O'Connell. His face was older, lined with a stress that hadn't been there before, but his eyes held a look of profound, weary relief. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Commander," Finn said, his voice thick with emotion. Javan tried to speak, but his throat was a desert. He managed a single, croaked word: Imogen. Finn's expression fell. "She's alive, Javan, physically. We have her in the next room, but the doctors say her brain activity is minimal. There's no higher function. It's like the lights are on, but nobody's home." The news was a heavy, cold stone in Javan's chest. He had known, but hearing it confirmed made it real. The hero who had saved the universe was now a prisoner in her own skull. "Sheridan," Javan rasped. "Gone," Finn said, a hard edge to his voice. "After you vanished and the great silence from the veil began, she was declared a traitor and a terrorist. There was a power struggle. She disappeared. Some say she's in a black site prison. Others say she found a new set of backers and is in hiding, trying to understand what you did." Finn explained what had happened. Their final broadcast, the one declaring their name was Icarus, had been heard. It had been garbled, chaotic, but it was enough. Finn, convinced they were alive, had risked everything, leaking files, forcing an investigation that had toppled Sheridan's secret empire. The Phoenix was the result, a new international space agency born from the ashes of Sheridan's conspiracy, dedicated to understanding and guarding the Icarus Veil. "Your heroes, Javan," Finn said. "The whole world knows your names. You saved us from something we never even knew was there." But Javan didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a survivor, haunted by the ghosts of those who hadn't made it. After a week of recovery, they allowed him to see Imogen. She was sitting in a wheelchair, staring out a large viewport at the swirling colors of the veil. She was dressed in comfortable clothes, her hair was clean, but her eyes held the same profound emptiness he remembered from the capsule. He sat beside her, taking her hand. It was warm, but unresponsive. "We did it, Imogen," he whispered. "We closed the door." Her eyes did not move. Her expression did not change. He spent an hour with her talking, but he was speaking to a statue. The weight of his failure, his inability to save the part of her that mattered, settled on him like a shroud. He became a recluse on the Phoenix. The crew treated him with a mixture of awe and pity. He was a living legend who couldn't bear to look anyone in the eye. He spent all his time in the observation lounge, staring at the veil, searching its chaotic patterns for some sign, some echo of the consciousness that had sacrificed itself. The scientists aboard the Phoenix were studying the veil with a feverish intensity. They told him it was not just a nebula, it was a scar, but it was also a shield. It emitted a constant, low-level, reality-stabilizing frequency. The laws of physics inside their own solar system were now subtly, but measurably, more robust, more resistant to paradox. The closing of the door had reinforced the walls of their reality. But the veil was not a perfect shield. Sometimes, probes sent near its edge would return with corrupted data, their clocks desynchronized, their memory banks filled with the same impossible, alien code that Piotr had once transcribed. The door was closed, but the house it was attached to was still there. The monster was still sleeping on the other side. One day, a young astrophysicist approached Javan in the lounge, her face alight with excitement. "Commander Grise, we found something, a pattern, a repeating signal from deep inside the veil. It's not a language, not as we know it. It's a heartbeat, a slow, steady, rhythmic pulse of pure causality." Javan felt a jolt, a sudden, impossible surge of hope. He followed her to the main science lab. On the screen was a waveform, a simple, beautiful, rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat in the heart of chaos. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, what he was seeing. The reality bomb had not been a suicide. It had been a birth. The combined consciousness of Imogen and Piotr, the weapon of pure existence, had not just closed the door. It had become the lock. It was a new, nascent god, a sentinel of their reality, its heartbeat the steady rhythm that kept the walls of their universe from collapsing. Imogen had not died. She had ascended. Chapter 23: The Last Guardian. The discovery of the heartbeat changed everything for Javan. The Icarus Veil was no longer a graveyard or a scar. It was a cradle. The entity he had served with, the being that had been his crewmate, was alive in a way he could barely comprehend. His grief was transmuted into a profound, almost religious sense of purpose. He was no longer a survivor. He was a witness. He threw himself into the research, his old, methodical mind reawakening. He worked with the science teams, helping them decipher the strange energies of the veil. His first-hand experience, his memory of the impossible physics inside the Stargazer 7, was the key that unlocked their understanding. He was the only person alive who had seen the other side, and he became the high priest of the new, strange science of reality maintenance. He spent every spare moment with Imogen's physical body. He would wheel her to the observation lounge, and together they would watch the veil. He would talk to her, not about the past, but about the now. He would describe the scientific breakthroughs, the patterns in the heartbeat, sharing the data with the empty vessel, hoping some echo of it might reach the divine consciousness she had become. During one of these sessions, as he was describing a new theory about causal resonance, her hand, which he was holding, twitched in his. Javan froze. He looked at her face. Her expression was unchanged, her eyes still vacant. It was probably an involuntary muscle spasm. He dismissed it, his hope too fragile to be built on such a flimsy foundation. But a few days later, it happened again. He was reading her a passage from a book of poetry, and her fingers gently curled, for a fraction of a second, around his. He began to experiment. He would talk about specific, shared memories from their time in the capsule, the ghost in the numbers, the handprint on the glass, the first time they heard Pyatr's voice. And each time he would be rewarded with a small, almost imperceptible physical response. A twitch of a finger, a flutter of an eyelid. The doctors had no explanation. Her brain scans were unchanged, but Javan knew. He was communicating with her, not through words but through memory. The empty vessel was not entirely empty. A single, thin, quantumly entangled thread still connected the woman in the chair to the god in the nebula. His purpose became clear. He was not just a witness. He was an anchor. He was her tether to the humanity she had sacrificed. The years passed. The UNSA Phoenix became a permanent station, a lonely sentinel guarding the edge of human space. Javan Grise became its permanent commander, a quiet, gray-haired man who was spoken of in legends. He never returned to Earth. He could not. His place was here, at the edge of the abyss, standing his watch. He never gave up on Imogen. His daily ritual of talking to her, of sharing the universe with her, continued. Her responses grew over time from twitches to slow, deliberate movements. One day, years after their rescue, as he was describing the latest reading of the Veil's heartbeat, she turned her head. Slowly, with a monumental effort that seemed to take an eternity, she turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were not empty. For a single, breathtaking moment, they were filled with the light of 1,000 distant stars. And she smiled, a real, gentle, familiar smile. The connection was not one way. He was her anchor, but she and the being she had become was his. She was the reason he had not succumbed to despair, the reason he had found a new life in the ashes of the old. He smiled back, his own eyes filling with tears. "It's good to see you, Dr. Zola," he said. Her smile faded, the light in her eyes receding, leaving the familiar, peaceful emptiness behind. But it was enough. He knew she was in there. He knew she was listening. Chapter 24. A Whisper on the Wind. Javan grew old aboard the Phoenix. His hair turned white, his movements slowed, but his eyes remained sharp, forever fixed on the shimmering curtain of the Veil. He was the station's living memory, its spiritual core. Crews came and went, bright young scientists and pilots who had grown up hearing the story of the Stargazer 7. To them, he was a figure of myth, the man who had stared into the void and returned. His work never ended. The Veil was not a static, passive shield. It was a dynamic, living thing. Sometimes it would flare, its colors shifting violently, its heartbeat becoming erratic. During these reality storms, the ship would be plagued by minor causal glitches, tools disappearing and reappearing, clocks running backwards for a few seconds, faint echoes of the chaos he had experienced in the capsule. Javan was always the calm center of these storms, his experience guiding the crew, his presence a reassurance that the walls of their reality would hold. He knew these storms were battles. The entity on the other side, the great old one, had not forgotten them. It would sometimes press against the barrier, testing it, searching for cracks. And the sentinel, the consciousness of Imogen and Piotr, would push back. His ship, his crew, were living on the front line of a silent, eternal war. One day, a long-range sensor picked up an anomaly. A ship, small and running dark, was approaching the veil from the direction of the outer solar system. It was not broadcasting any identification codes. Javan was on the bridge in minutes. "Magnify the image," he ordered. The ship was a twisted, ugly thing, a patchwork of different technologies. And on its hull, faded but unmistakable, was the corporate logo of the company that had funded Director Sheridan. "She's back," Javan said, his voice a low growl. The blood in his veins, old and slow, suddenly ran cold with a familiar fire. The rogue ship was not approaching the Phoenix. It was heading for a specific, quiet sector of the Veil. It began to broadcast a signal, a complex, high-energy resonance beam. It was a smaller version of the device Finn had warned him about all those years ago. Sheridan had not given up. She was still trying to pick the lock on the door to oblivion. "She's insane," the new captain of the Phoenix said, standing beside Javan. "That signal could destabilize the entire Veil. It could undo everything you did." "She doesn't care," Javan said. "She's a fanatic. She wants her God, and she'll sacrifice our reality to get it." The Veil reacted to the signal. The sector where Sheridan's ship was broadcasting began to boil, the colors turning a sick, angry purple-green. The heartbeat, which had been steady for years, began to flutter wildly. The sentinel was being distracted, weakened by the direct assault. On another screen, a sensor alarm flared. A tiny, almost imperceptible tear was opening in a different part of the veil. A causal fissure. The monster on the other side was taking advantage of the distraction. They had to stop her, but they were a science vessel, not a warship. They had no weapons. "We can't shoot her down," the captain said, his hands clenched. "What do we do?" Javan looked at the screen, at the ugly, desperate ship trying to tear a hole in his universe. He thought of Pyotr's fall, of Imogen's sacrifice. He had been a witness, an anchor. Now he had to be a guardian. "No," Javan said, a strange, calm certainty settling over him. "We can't shoot her down, but we can talk to her." He walked to the main comms station. "Open a direct, narrow-beam channel to that ship, audio only. Patch it through to my personal comm unit." He turned and walked off the bridge towards the observation lounge, towards Imogen. Chapter 25. The Final Echo. He entered the quiet of the observation lounge. Imogen was in her usual spot by the viewport, her back to the door, her gaze fixed on the swirling chaos of the veil. The distant, angry purple-green of Sheridan's assault was a stain on the beautiful tapestry. Javan pulled up a chair beside her, his movements slow and deliberate. He took her hand. It felt frail, the skin like paper over bone. "They're hailing us," he said softly, as if continuing a long conversation. "It's Sheridan, she's back, she's trying to tear it all down." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know you're fighting, I can feel it, but you're spread too thin. I need your help, Imogen. We need you one last time." He activated his comm unit. "Director Sheridan, this is Commander Javan Grise. It's been a long time." A burst of static, then her voice, older, more ragged, but filled with the same cold, fanatical fire. "Grise, the ghost. I should have known they'd keep their pet legend on a leash. It doesn't matter. You're too late. The resonance cycle is almost complete. My work is almost finished." "Your work is to kill us all," Javan said calmly. "You saw what was on the other side. I know you did. You saw it in my telemetry, in my logs." "I saw a god," she hissed. "A being of pure, beautiful chaos. Our universe is a stagnant pond of boring, predictable physics. I intend to shatter the dam and let the river run free." "There is no river," Javan said. "Only a mouth. It will not set us free, it will eat us." He looked at Imogen's vacant face. "You were wrong about Project Icarus, Director. You thought you were studying a ghost, but you missed the most important part. A ghost is a memory. It's an echo of a life. It has a story. That is its power. You only saw a tool. You never bothered to listen to the story." He leaned closer to his comm unit. "I'm going to tell you a story now, Director. It's about a man named Pyotr Volkov. He was a son and a patriot, and he loved the stars so much he gave his life to them. And for 50 years his memory was a lonely whisper in the dark, until a woman named Imogen Zola, a brilliant, brave scientist, heard his whisper. She didn't see a tool or a weapon. She saw a soul in pain, and she reached out her hand." As he spoke, he felt a faint pressure from Imogen's hand. He looked at her. A single, clear tear was tracing a path down her cheek. The stellar light he had not seen in years was beginning to kindle in the depths of her eyes. "She gave everything, Sheridan." Javan's voice grew in power, resonating with a truth that shook the very air. "She gave her mind, her spirit, herself, not to open a door to a monster, but to build a shield to protect us from it. She and Pyotr, their two human souls, became something more. They became a lock. They became the wall. And you are throwing pebbles at a mountain." On the other end of the line, Sheridan was silent. "You speak of gods and chaos," Javan continued, his voice now a low, powerful sermon. "But you have no idea what real power is. It's not in the void between the stars. It's in the spaces between people, in memory, in sacrifice, in the choice to reach out your hand to someone who is falling." He looked at Imogen. The light in her eyes was now a steady, brilliant glow. She turned her head and looked at him. And then she spoke. Her voice was a perfect, harmonious chorus of her own and Pyotr's, a sound that resonated with the very heartbeat of the veil itself. "Let her see." A beam of pure, white light, the color of concentrated reality, erupted from the heart of the veil. It was not an attack. It was a communication. It struck Sheridan's ship, passed harmlessly through its hull, and enveloped it. On the bridge of the Phoenix, the crew watched in stunned silence. The resonance beam from Sheridan's ship faltered, then died. Her ship went dark, its engines failing. It was now dead in space, adrift before the majesty of the veil. Javan knew what Sheridan was seeing. She was being given the gift that had almost broken him and Imogen. She was being shown the truth, not just a glimpse through a lens, but a full, unfiltered immersion in the mind of the great Old One. She was experiencing its ancient cosmic hunger, its utter, alien contempt for all life, all order, all existence. And she was experiencing the 50 years of Piotr's loneliness and the infinite, defiant love that had fueled Imogen's sacrifice. She was being shown the monster, and she was being shown the cost of holding it back. He closed the comm channel. His work was done. He looked at Imogen. The light was fading from her eyes, the effort having taken its toll. She was returning to her quiet repose. But before she did, her lips moved, and a final, single word in her own voice, a faint, human whisper, reached his ears. Javan. It was the first time she had said his name in decades. It was enough. It was everything. He sat with her, holding her hand, as the rescue crews from the Phoenix went to retrieve the catatonic, broken shell of Maeve Sheridan. He watched the angry purple stain on the veil fade back to its normal, beautiful colors. The heartbeat of the sentinel slowed, returning to its steady, rhythmic beat. The wall was secure. The guardian was at peace. Javan Grise, the last survivor of the Stargazer 7, sat in the quiet of the observation lounge, a tired old man who had saved the world. He was no longer alone. He was home. The end.